welcome back to the Horror Cult Films podcast. I'm David Smith. To round off our Hellraiser retrospective, myself and Alistair are delighted to share this special feature-length interview with effects legend Gary J. Tunnicliffe. Gary has worked on every single Hellraiser since the third in some capacity, meaning he's done as many as Doug Bradley himself. He's a dead interesting guy, he's had a hell of a career, but is also refreshingly as blunt as he is passionate about the franchise. For this reason, there's nobody we'd rather round off our coverage with. Please note we have some sound issues since we're connecting Scotland to Romania, but I think what he says will be well worth the occasional hiss in your ear. Enjoy! Hello Gary, and thank you so much for coming on the Horror Cult Films podcast with us today.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
So, I was wondering, how does a young guy growing up in Staffordshire, England, end up going on to do special effects for some massive Hollywood films?
You have to beat people to death and lie and connive your way and be mean and evil and underhand and all that kind of stuff. A lot of what I'm going to say has been said before in various other places, so I'll try and mix it up a little bit. I wanted to be an actor, and and my dad said, "That's great. If you want to be an actor," he said, "you can come to work tomorrow with me and act like an electrician all day long." And so they wouldn't have any of it, even though I had teachers kind of vying for me. And then I figured, if you can't be an actor, then I'll be a singer in a rock band, because that was the 80s, and I was into heavy metal. And I was in various bands that were doing okay, but it just was going nowhere. And I was at a drummer's house, a good friend of mine, Craig Edgerton, and he had a copy of Fangoria, which I'd never even heard of. And suddenly I saw this magazine, and I loved horror films. I'd always loved horror films. I mean, growing up in England, my parents' way of kind of keeping me in line was, do I get to watch the Hammer horror film on a Friday night? And if I was good all week, I could watch it. And if I was bad, then I couldn't. So, I mean, I grew up watching all the classics, and I'm sure as most 12-year-olds growing up at that time, I got my first view of naked women as well in various kind of like, I remember kind of, I'd sit watching these movies at 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night in England on a Friday night. My dad would be asleep or had gone to bed saying, "You're okay watching this," like being 10 or 11 years old, and Twins of Evil being on and being like, "Good Lord, look at this is amazing." The Devil, whatever, Witchfinder kind of movie was on. So I got my titillation and my horrific stuff very early on with that kind of stuff. So cut forward 2 years later, a friend of mine's got a copy of Fangoria. I opened this magazine and I'm like, "What the hell is this thing?" And he's like, "It's a magazine from America called Fangoria." And it was the first time I realized, or I kind of made a connection. I'd always understood about special effects, but I hadn't made a connection between makeup effects and, I just didn't realize it was a job. It was kind of something you could actually do. And then when I opened the pages of the magazine, everybody who seemed to be doing makeup effects, because Fangoria really focused on makeup effects at the time, seemed to have long hair and be wearing a heavy metal T-shirt. And I was like, clearly this is the thing to get into. So literally that night, I kind of went home and I said, "Do you have any more of these magazines?" And he had like 150 of them. So or 80 of them. And I took them all and read them. And I'm a voracious reader anyway. So within 2 days, I knew who Rick Baker was and Rob Bottin and all these, Stan Winston and Tom Savini and everyone else, and then just kind of consumed it, and then was like, how do I do this? And really started off just doing it for fun, just kind of sculpting and making characters for fun, and then got a copy of the Dick Smith makeup book, how to do monster makeup, and started practicing on my sister, and basically started to build a little portfolio and got better and better and better at it. This was about when I was like 13, I was like 14, 15. So by the time I was 16 or 17, I was pretty, getting pretty decent at it. And then, and I'd started reading, I'd read Stephen King, but then I started reading Clive Barker and started reading his stuff and just kind of fell in love with that straight away. And when Hellraiser came out, I mean, I literally went to the Canuck Classic Cinema and had my mind blown and literally had an epiphany where I kind of stared at the screen and said, "Who did that? I want to do that. and and I want to be doing that makeup, and basically kind of put a plan into action to have that happen. So the rest of it then was just was hard work and kind of pushing my way, to get an interview at that studio, Image Animation, and Bob Keane very graciously gave me a job. They just finished Hellbound, I think, and kind of like started my tenure there, and within a year we were doing Hellraiser 3.
I saw that you did something called She-Wolf of London back in 1990. So was that kind of like part of the portfolio? Here's what I've done in the past.
No, the way I got the job was I actually I went to work for a guy called Chris Tucker, who I don't know if you know who Christopher Tucker is. Chris Tucker did the Elephant Man and the Phantom of the Opera and stuff like that. And Chris is a complete psychopathic lunatic. And I went to work for him and basically stayed at his house. And he had this mansion in Reading, and I mean a mansion. And there was me and a couple of other guys working there, literally like, Dickensian schoolboys, kind of like, not being able to eat and stuff, and working 7-day weeks and just being miserable as sin, and living in this kind of like very bizarre world. And I lasted about 3 or 4 months before one day I literally, after an event occurred, literally kind of said, fuck this, and walked out the front door and grabbed a foam latex piece I'd ran with me, and I called up Image Animation the next day. Once I got home back to Birmingham, kind of got on a train, got back to Birmingham, had some food. My mother said I looked like a grey waif. And I called Bob Keane up, and I said, hi, my name's Gary Tunnicliffe. I said, I've just been working at Chris Tucker's. And he went, oh, how long were you? Bob was like, how long were you at Chris Tucker's? And I said, about 3-4 months. And he went, you can start work Monday if you like. And I said, really? And he went, yeah, anyone who can survive more than a week at Chris Tucker's can come and work for me. And I did. And I kind of got down to London and suddenly found myself not only at the studio who'd done the Hellraiser movies, but I found myself part of a group of guys who were all the same age and all basically had the same kind of background and experiences of me. Surprisingly, a lot of them were from up north as well, from Liverpool and Lancashire and places like that, and Grimsby, and all of the same age group, all had the same kind of fan, all had the same kind of backgrounds, and we were like a brotherhood. And it was literally like Midian. I'd kind of found a home for monsters, and ironically enough, or not ironically enough, and naturally enough, most of them have gone on to huge things in the movie industry. People like Mark Coulier, who's won 2 Oscars, Dave Elsey, who won an Oscar for Wolfman, Stephen Norrington, who directed Blade, Chris Halls, who went on to become known as Chris Cunningham, Sean Harrison, who has a makeup effects studio and did the Harry Potter movies. They've all, the talent level there was unbelievable. Martin Mercer, who's now one of the top storyboard artists in Los Angeles, and worked on Lord of Illusions and most of Clive's things. It was pretty incredible to suddenly find myself there with those guys. But also at the same time as being great fun, it was also a very tenacious environment. You had to kind of fight to be there, you know what I mean? I mean, literally remember being there the first week and them sitting down and kind of grilling me about makeup effects, and I had to, who did the effects on this and who did that and what year did they do this and that kind of thing. And if you didn't know your stuff, you were ousted very quickly,
And so did you then move off to live in America permanently at that point, or what you thought would be permanent at the time?
I'd been at Image about 3 years. I'd moved my way up to the ranks very quickly at Image. I had a knack for supervision and for organization because I'd had previous jobs. And a lot of the guys there were kind of art student graduates and stuff like this, whereas I'd actually been out in the real world since I was 16 and had various real jobs. So I had a knack for supervision. I remember I'd been there about 3 months, and Bob Keane pulled me into the office and said, you're going to end up running this place. He said, I can't let you do it now, but he said, there'll be a riot, but you'll run it eventually. So when the guys went to do Hellraiser Hell on Earth, they went on set in Carolina. I stayed in England and prepped Candyman, and started to get a knack for kind of like being able to organize the crews. And then what happened was over the years, both I and Bob made a plan to open a company in Los Angeles. So after 3 years, we did that. And I always wanted to be in LA. My sole agenda was to get to America. I wanted to work amongst my peers, and I love England, I do, but I've always felt that Makeup Effects is a very American art form, and I wanted to work alongside. I wanted to be in the Valley in LA, and find myself and kind of pit myself against the KNBs and the Dick Grad Cams and the ADIs and everyone else, and trying to hold my end up there. So in 1994, I moved out to LA the day before the earthquake. The day before the earthquake, I moved to LA. Yeah, that was a bit of a shocker, but and I've been there ever since.
Cool. And when you come to Hell on Earth, obviously you're going in as a fan of the series. So I imagine that that was really fucking cool working on the series that you liked for a start. But was your role at that point quite a creative one, or because Hellraiser's got a very particular aesthetic to it, and I'm wondering if from the get-go you were sort of creating Cenobites.
No. I was way too lowly to be creating Cenobites. No. The way it worked Image Animation in those days were kind of people were given choice tasks and allowed to kind of do their own thing. So Paul Jones, who had an effects company in Canada for a long time, but he's working back in England. Paul Jones was one of the senior technicians there. He went on to do. He got Pinhead. He was given Pinhead, and he was given Camera Head. Mark Coulier, who's recently done everything from the Oliver Hardy and Stan Laurel movie, and Margaret Thatcher, and Hotel Budapest, kind of one of the greatest old age makeup artists on the planet now. He did the female Cenobite, but I did design the gloves for that. I suggested the idea of the opera gloves for the female in that, and then Dave Elsey did the JP Monroe Cenobite, and which other Cenobites are there? Oh, and then the two Cenobites which weren't Cenobites, and they were never in the script, Barbie and CD. They were supposed to be just victims in the bar, and Martin Mercer sculpted these two really cool masks. And then when they got out there, Tony Hickox decided they needed more Cenobites. So literally the guys took the masks and then were going down to like local stores and buying anything that was black and leather. They were going to pet shops and buying dog leashes and chains to make Cenobite costumes for Barbie and CD.
I can't believe you forgot about CD at first.
They were made up. If you remember, because they were just supposed to be victims in the bar. They were supposed to be the barman who gets wrapped up in barbed wire, and the DJ gets hit with some CDs and killed. So those were in the script, but then they became turned into pseudo Cenobites, as they called them.
Was that to kind of up the scale for the New York scene at the end, I take it?
Yeah, that was the idea, was make it bigger. And then Paul Catling, brilliant Paul Catling, he did the Pillar of Souls. And then my responsibility chiefly was the box. So I made all the boxes on that. And then I was kind of supervising the shop. So I was making sure people had it. The schedules were being adhered to, and kind of things were getting made, and organising crew and hiring people. In fact, it's quite funny because Bob was out of the country at the time when we were prepping Hellraiser Hell on Earth, and I hired was it afterwards or before? I hired Dave Olsey, and I hired a bunch of the guys who worked on Hellraiser 1, because I kind of had an affinity for them because of kind of being a fan of the first movie. But those guys hadn't worked at Image for a long time, so I hired people like Will Petty and Stewie Connor, and people who'd worked on the first film. So Hellraiser 3, I was a guy in the shop doing the Hellraiser boxes and kind of supervising and organising the shop and the crew. And luckily, Dave Keane, Bob's brother, who did all of the kind of like practical effects, he said, "Look, you've done a great job. We should give you a workshop supervisor credit." So on that movie, I'm credited as workshop supervisor. And then we went and did reshoots, and I had a much bigger involvement in the reshoots.
Just to follow up on the Cenobites that you've been working with, I know as the series progressed, you would have, I think, more input on them.
Since Hellraiser 4, I've designed every Cenobite. After Hellraiser 4, I designed everything.
What I've always liked is that obviously we have the original 4 Cenobites, and there's something very special about them. But obviously the way that the series went with 3 onwards, what I do appreciate is that it opens up creatively to introduce sort of new Cenobites per movie. And with some of the Cenobites that you've created, do you want to talk a little bit about them and which ones maybe your favorites?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the desire to do big things with Cenobites is huge, but you can't do it sometimes because of budget. And sometimes you're kind of limited by what's written in a script. Like I remember that, Peter Atkins, who, my great friend Peter Atkins, who wrote obviously Hellbound and Hell on Earth and Bloodline, he kind of served me a high and a low on Bloodline because he wrote a Siamese twin Cenobite, which is like, oh, what a nightmare. Because immediately you think, I want to do kind of a twisted head together thing, but you can't. You have to do two people standing next to each other. So it's always going to look like two guys kind of standing together.
To ask quickly on that one, was your inspiration for that, was it the Sock and Boschkin theatre masks?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I thought so. It had that look to it.
The happy and sad theatre masks, exactly. Which are ironic, and again, strange enough, those were sculpted by me, Kevin Yeager, but also Stephen Norrington. Stephen Norrington ended up sculpting on those. So the director of Blade sculpted on those as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were, I went for the kind of like the happy and sad masks. But the one I was most happy with was Angelique. And the funny thing about that was the design wasn't very specific in the script, but I just wanted a very cool, I had a thing for kind of like cool, sexy looking feminine Cenobites. I always think they look cool. So oddly enough, I got the idea for her, and this has been written and heard about before, but I came in and my girlfriend was watching Sister Act on TV. And I was looking at a nun's whip, is it a whipple they call it? Like the nun's headdress shape there. And I thought if we peeled the skin back and then put wires down to her shoulders, it would look kind of cool. So I did a little napkin drawing and then I whizzed it over to my friend Miles Tevis, who's a fantastic designer who designed things like RoboCop and Legend for Rob Bottin, or with Rob Bottin, and a beautiful artist. And he did this beautiful rendering, and we showed that to Kevin Yeager, and he was like, "Yeah, that's fantastic. Go ahead and do it." So, yeah, I'm very, very proud of Angelique. I think she looks cool.
She does.
One of my personal favorites is a Cenobite that's not seen. It got cut, and it's one I played. It's the Spike Cenobite, and I love Spike, and I just wanted to do something really, really big and wacky. So,
in my notes, that is one of my questions for you was about the Spike Cenobite, because it's such a striking visual. It really is.
It is, and I said to the guys, I'm going to wear it. I ended up wearing it, but and it was a nightmare to wear because you bang into stuff. But I said, I just want one of those. I was like the idea of Cenobite designs that sometimes there are a lot of questions in your head, like what on earth is going on there, or how does that work? I think sometimes if a design is just too in the box, it's like, oh yeah, I can see exactly what I'm getting. Whereas I think Spike always is one of those things that always gets a second look and like, what am I looking at here? So
I think I had all those questions about the torso Chatterer.
Yeah, and torso. Well, torso was a weird one because I just always want to get Chatterer back into the movie, and in Inferno, they Chatterer wasn't in there at all, and there was these two sexy females, and I again took my love of Angelique and kind of pushed it to the next stage and did the Wire Twins, but Scott Derrickson had got this sequence in the script where basically it said, he's running down the stairs and the two females are behind him, and then he just said in the script, like something horrendous comes up the stairs and scares him to death. And they wanted like a spider creature or something. Or it was just written very dodgily. And I saw a design and it was like, dear, oh dear. And we had no money. My entire budget for the effects on Hellraiser Inferno, including on set work, was $50,000, which was nothing.
Wow.
I actually didn't get paid a penny to work on that movie. I didn't get paid a penny.
Wow.
When I did it and I did the budget and they said, we've got $50,000, do you want to do it or not? And I said, yeah, I do, because I love Hellraiser. I'm an idiot. And I said to my girlfriend at the time who ran the studio with me, I said, we're doing this and I'm not getting paid. And she's like, well, how are we going to do it? And I said, well, we'll pay the crew and we'll pay the bills, and I think it'll get me back in with Dimension, and I don't want to lose Hellraiser. So we had to do this creature and they wanted something, and I was just like, this is, how do you do something? And I don't know, I was driving back from the meeting thinking about it, and I just remember thinking, if you were to put your hands like on a table, like in a press-up position, and if we painted his body black and did it in the dark, and I could do a Chatterer, I could kind of like do a homage to Chatterer, and he could come crawling up the stairs. It's cheap, simple, effective. And I spoke to the digital guy who was doing the film, and he said, yeah, we can do that really easily. And Scott was actually really kind of not into it at all, but I did a drawing and they liked it. And again, I think it's a really striking image. I think it worked out really, really well. And Torso Chatterer, again, is one of my favorites. And it was the first time I got to put Mike Regan, who's one of my shop guys and my best friend, and he has played Chatterer ever since, Mike has. So. So yeah, I
All
would
right.
say I think Torso Chatter is cool. I like the Y Twins. I love. I think the Y Twins are very cool. They were a difficult makeup to do, but
Yeah.
they're fun. Angelique, I really love. I can't say the Auditor because he's not a Cenobite. So otherwise, I would. I'd put the Auditor in there, but he's not a Cenobite technically. I mean, even. Even the Stitch, which I got to make as the Stitch Twins later on. But I mean, I kind of like. He was originally called Manson, but we called him the Surgeon later on. So they're all special in my mind. But I do miss Spike. I think Spike was kind of a fun design.
It's a shame that one didn't make the final cut.
Yeah, but I get so many people come up to me and say they like it. And I've seen tattoos of it on people, which is always really, really cool. So you know it's a strong image when people will scour the deleted scenes or But I've got no idea why Rick cut it out of the film. I've got no idea at all. I've got no idea what he was thinking because to me it was like one shot. It did no harm, and it was like it's pure, pure value, production value. So
I would have said, to complement your point, that it would certainly give the Cenobites that mystique about what are they really, and reintroduce, I suppose, the mystery behind them.
Yeah.
Which I think a couple films have sort of taken that away and sort of discovering the box, and that the Cenobites used to be people, which was effectively done in Hellraiser 2.
Oh, yeah. You have to remember that down the pipe, it's kind of well documented that the films were other movies that were shoehorned into Hellraiser. And the difficult thing I constantly found being involved with all of the sequels pretty much was that nobody really gave a shit about the fact that they were Hellraiser or understood the mythology or cared about the mythology. So a lot of the time I was like, it was like, we need to do this or we need to honor that or they should look this way. And, they should have some emblems of humanity and everyone would be like, why? And you go, because that's the myth. That's the myth, guys. You know what I mean? That's the law.
Yeah.
And directors along the way trying to change it or try to fight it. I mean, there were things that Scott did. I mean, I actually really like Inferno. I do like Inferno. And Scott's clearly a very talented director, as he's obvious by the work he's done since. But I think he got restricted by it. I think he'd like to have just done a solid, Inferno movie on his own with some strange, bizarre imagery. And Rick Bota, Rick was always trying to. Rick's a lovely guy and a very funny guy and a very competent kind of technical director, but he was always kind of like. I felt like he was replicating rather than innovating. So he always just wanted to do Joel Peter Whitkin stuff and it was all about the weird moment kind of thing. And I just never thought he captured it really.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. Yeah.
We were talking about this in the last episode about Rick Bota, where he seems to be able to do these like almost like music video sequences, which look, you've got some really striking images in them. I think that he seemed to prioritize that over the story a lot. But when he was doing these sorts of sequences, was it quite a good collaboration that you guys had going?
Oh, I loved Rick and got on really, really well. And he's a sweet guy and a funny guy. I just think he was regarded by Dimension that he delivered the goods and kind of like did it on time and wasn't hard to work with. And he wasn't like a crazy maverick creative, like I want it this way. I think he was just doing the job. I mean, a good example, this might sound like I'm blowing smoke at my own butt. Have you seen No More Souls? The short I did.
I have not. I've heard about this. Is it on YouTube at the moment?
It's on YouTube. Yeah, you can find it on YouTube, and it's on the special features. It's hidden actually on Deda. It's you have to unlock the puzzle box, and you will get to see it on there. There's like a little tip if you have to kind of like you have to highlight the box in the special features, and you can get it. But it's on YouTube.
This was your stint as Pinhead. I think I've seen that, but it was a while back now.
Yeah, well, it was. I came back from Hellworld and we did Deda and Hellworld, and I came back very depressed, especially after Hellworld. I was really miserable because I thought Hellworld was pretty abortionate. And I came back and I was like, "That's it, guys." I said, "I'm never going to get to direct a Hellraiser because I've been trying to push for it for a while, and I had some strong ideas." And my crew said, "Why don't you do a short? We'll help you." And I was like, "That's not a bad idea." And this is way before kind of fan films. So I wrote a short that weekend, a little 6-minute kind of soliloquy. And then we built a set and I rented a high definition camera for $2,000. And I knew nothing about operating a camera. But I read the manual. I was in the online forums the night before. And because I'm English, I was the only English person in that crew. I was like, well, I'll play Pinhead. You know, I can wear the costume, the makeup will work on me, and I can do an English voice. And, you know, I didn't want Pinhead to be American. I couldn't hire actors. It was just it was like a little fan project. But as I made it, I made it and finished it, and then I showed the footage to Patrick Lussier, who directed, Dracula 2000 and Drive Angry and My Bloody Valentine. And Patrick is a brilliant editor who did the Scream movies, and he watched the footage and said, hey, I can edit this together for you if you like. And I was like, that'd be great. So I gave it to him, and then he showed it to Kirk Murray, who's now James Wan's editor. And Kirk saw it and was like, hey, do you want a hand on post-production supervision? And I was like, yeah, great, can you? And then Henning Lohner, who did the music on Deader, said, do you want me to do the music for it? So everyone started jumping in and helping out. And I made this little short. And Rick Boter actually came to my shop about 2 months after I'd finished it. And I hadn't done anything with it. You couldn't put stuff on the internet at that time. So I showed it to Rick. I was like, hey, look at this. I just did this silly little Hellraiser short. And Rick stood there and watched it. And his first question was, who lit this? This is really nicely lit. And I was like, I lit it using, work lights with cookies on them. But he said, at the end of it, he said, I think you captured more Hellraiser tone in your 6-minute short than I ever did in 3 movies. He said, you should direct these movies. He said, not me. And it was a weird thing. So it was very frustrating because I love Rick and he's a nice guy. I can't stress this enough. If I was going to hang out and have a drink with somebody, Rick Boter would be one of those guys that I would do it in a heartbeat. But I don't know if he was the right guy for Hellraiser, because I think he just kind of I think Deader was the best of the 3 that he did. I thought Deader was the best movie he did. You know?
Of his 3, I do agree that is my personal favorite as well.
I was a Hellseeker man myself, but he's a Deader guy. we both see Hellworld as being the weakest one.
Yeah. Those 3 films, I mean, they do strike me as almost remakes of Hellraiser Inferno.
Yeah.
Like, all 3 of them do strike me that way.
Hellseeker, I think, benefited obviously because you got Ashley involved, and that was really cool. And it was very cool to be on the set with Ashley and Doug, and with the little kind of Cenobite face-off scene. That was like, you got chills from that. It was like, oh, look at this is great. Deader, I thought Deader was the film that Rick really prepared for, kind of knew what he wanted and really did some work on it, and was really in kind of like gnawing, really kind of had an idea of what he was doing. Hellworld, you have to understand, Hellworld was thrown together at the last minute. It really was. We didn't have a full script until like a week before. We were prepping effects that were not that were never seen, and it all just got a bit. I mean, I was never in love with the initial concept of it anyway. I mean, the only good thing about that was the cast were a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We had Lance and Henry was so young, and Carrie was fun, and Catherine Winnick was amazing. I mean, the one thing about Dimension, always working with Dimension, is they, whoever the casting people were at Dimension, they had a real eye for talent. If you go back and look at Hellraiser movies, people like Adam Scott in Bloodline, who then went on to become this huge comedic kind of actor in a force. And you look at even Hellworld, and there's Henry Cavill, who became obviously Henry Cavill, but Catherine Winnick, who also had a huge career as well. So I mean, they always had good cast, and that was one thing that was good. But I was really mega depressed after Hellworld. I was like, that's probably the last one we'll ever do, and what a way to go out. And I thought it was an absolute travesty that that Doug Bradley, who established this wonderful character, this brilliant character with nuanced performance and these fantastic romantic lines that we all know and love, you're suffering with legendary even in hell, and oh, no tears, please, it's a waste of good suffering, and all that, right? His last line on camera ever uttered.
Oh, fuck yeah.
How's that for a wake-up call? I mean, it's literally like a fucking Ken Dodd line. By Jove, how's that for a wake-up call? I mean, it's
Freddy Krueger at most.
Sorry?
Yeah, like Pinhead was never meant to be Freddy Krueger, and that's like a bad Freddy line,
It's a horrible, horrible line. I remember when I was trying to get Doug on Judgment, I think I was like, don't you want to say something better? Have your, your legacy be something better than how's that for a wake-up call? Although I am proud of the fact that I am the Cenobite I'm one of the Cenobites who's slinging the blade and chopping Lance in half. So that's I'm the fat one, by the way. So, that was one fun bit about it. Was that
we do have a question about that scene, because obviously with Hellworld, it's only really a Hellraiser film during the epilogue, where technically Lance Henriksen opens the box and then the Cenobites come. So it's like the last 5 minutes. Now it's a Hellraiser film. In that scene, when Lance Henriksen's getting diced in half, cleaved, and his top half is lying there, and we see the effect, like his insides and the blood and that fact, just that design of his corpse there, was that an homage to Bishop from Aliens?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The concept of the death was my idea anyway. Because it was like, how are we going to kill him? And I said, let's have two Cenobites come in with big kind of blades on chains. And I said, we can chop him in half here. And they were like, why like that? Again, it's one of these things with producers who have no concept of horror. I'm like, we're going to cut him right across here. And they're like, why? And I'm like, because he's Bishop, dude. And they're like, Bishop, and I'm like, oh, fucking, and Lance's like, hey, that's fucking cool. Yeah, we'll do that. That'll be awesome, brother.
Yeah.
So he got it, Lance got it, but it was like, yeah, it was totally supposed to be, it was totally a homage to the great Bishop. So
yeah. So I was just going to say, he definitely elevated that film. I love his line, if you need anything, just scream.
Yeah. Oh, Lance I've got to say, I've worked with Lance on a bunch of things, and he's fantastic. I mean, the way we got him into Hellworld was because we were actually in Romania shooting Mimic 3.
He was in that, yeah.
And Lance was in that, and Lance was in the casino, where Lance spent a lot of time in the casino. And Rick Bota came over and said, hey, is Lance still here? And I was like, yeah, absolutely, and he's like, I think I want him to play the one character in Mimic. So he got talking to Lance. But I remember my first ever meeting with Lance was I went into we were staying in a beautiful hotel in Bucharest called the Marriott Grand, which is a fantastic hotel. It's like one of the top hotels in Europe. And our producer, Ron Schmidt, had got an amazing deal. So we're all staying in this beautiful palatial hotel on this low-budget horror film. But I went into they had a bar there called Champions, like a sports bar. And there's Lance Henriksen sitting there having a beer. And me and my guys, we kind of went over and said, hey, Lance, we're going to be working with you doing the effects. He's like, hey, guys, sit down, have a beer. And then we just sat down and we spent about 3 hours with him. And he went through his entire career. We did stuff. We were doing Omen lines, lines from the Omen 2 and the right stuff and just everything. He went through his entire career. We talked about every movie he'd ever done and about Cameron and Aliens. And, it was a fantastic day. And we became firm friends after that. I keep in touch with Lance. Actually, Lance has a pottery company, or he did, called Screaming Red Ass Pottery, and he's a character. And he did another film afterwards, like a little boxing movie. And he's like, would you help out and do this boxing makeup? And I said, yeah, sure. And he said, how much? And I said, one of your plates, that one there. And he said, hey man, you're sure? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Now, Lance is amazing, and I'm so thrilled that he's just done. He did this film a couple of years ago with. I've just had a complete brain fart, but he's just done this movie where he plays like a really cool dramatic role where he's playing a father, a father-son relationship in a movie. And I was like, and it talks about Oscar potential for that, and it's like, yeah, Lance deserves it because he's a phenomenal actor and a really, really nice guy.
Absolutely. Like you see his work and stuff like Millennium, and you just like, everyone recognizes him, but he's usually not the leading man in these things.
Well, there was a while Lance became known as the $200,000 man because you could get him in a movie for $200,000. That was the easiest thing in the world. So, and he was just like, hey man, I can get a paycheck. But yeah, I mean, phenomenal actor, and a thoroughly entertaining guy as well.
When you're on the set of something like Hellworld, where it's none of us' favorite movie in the series, let's put it that way. I know nobody sets out to make a bad film, but like, what's the kind of atmosphere like on set? Because I imagine people don't really know what it's going to look like till it's ready. But is there kind of like also a feeling that it's being rushed while it was being made? So I understand it was made because you had to make 2 films in Bucharest.
Yeah, they were shot back to back. No, absolute optimism. And we had a very young, enthusiastic cast. Henry was young, Carrie was young, Catherine was young. They were all just young and really happy to be there and thrilled. The Romanians hadn't got a clue what they were doing. Hadn't got a clue what they were doing making a film. They hadn't got a clue what Hellraiser was. They hadn't got a clue. Unlike any other film set in the world where, like, I had to take Hellraiser boxes and lock them up in between scenes, I could leave Hellraiser boxes lying around and... Romanians didn't give a shit. If I left a chicken sandwich around, they would have eaten that in a heartbeat and stolen it. But Hellraiser box, they didn't care. They were like, "What is Hellraiser thing?" And they thought Pinhead was kind of weird looking. No, there was no sense of like, "Oh, what are we doing here?" I mean, I did because I'd read the script and I was like, "This is not very good." You know what I mean? And just kind of like a bit. Bleh. But I mean, everybody went into it with full gusto. But I mean, I think there was more. It felt like if you were a chef making a 3-course meal, and Rick was making a 3-course meal, and the starter and the main course were deader. He'd kind of forgotten about dessert a little bit.
Right.
So then he blew his wad on the appetizer and the main course, and by the time we got to the dessert, it was a bit like, yeah. Oh yeah, what is this got nuts in it? Oh yeah, and cherries. Oh, and cream. Like why are we putting that in there? You know, it was all just a bit like you got the feeling that certain people in the crew were like, I just want to go home now. Not Doug, not the cast. They were all kind of like very enthusiastic. We were enthusiastic. I mean, again, I had a great time on it. I mean, like I say, the cast were amazing. Really energetic young cast who you got the feeling they were just having a blast. You know what I mean? In a new city, in a nice hotel, working on this movie and doing the very best they could. Doing the very best they could. So it was. I mean, there was no sense of like, what this is garbage, right? I just felt that when we left, that I was like, that wasn't. It was really after that end scene and with Doug's final words that I was like, I don't know about that, guys. You know what I mean? I don't know if that's the film because we genuinely thought it might be the last Hellraiser film ever. So it was a bit like, really, that's how we're going out. Who knew that Revelations was to come?
We'll be coming up to Revelations and Judgment in just a wee bit, but I was wondering, we've talked about budgets quite a bit, right? And when it comes to Bloodline, I know that Bloodline had its budget cut astronomically, pun partially intended, while you guys were making it. And like, was there many big bits of Bloodline that you had kind of worked on that they said, right, we got to chop this?
What did you hear, and who's told you that?
Well, I was reading the original script for it, and they mentioned, and I know that the film became an Alan Smithy film, where I think maybe it was just a Wikipedia page, but the director was talking about how, or at least it was being suggested that he talked about how he was having the purse strings tightened as they were making it. No.
No, you don't start a movie with that. Your budget doesn't get cut while you're making a movie. There was an amount of movie, the script was signed off on, the budget was done, and we started making the film, and that was simple. There was nothing in the original script that was cut out. The shooting script. I mean, obviously, I think Peter's original draft, was was much more grandiose. But no, what happened on Hellraiser Bloodline was, we started shooting. Kevin Yeager was the director. Kevin Yeager, who's a very, very, very well-known effects artist, and who directed like some Tales from the Crypt episodes, etc. So we started shooting, and Kevin had hired Francis Kenny to be the DP. And Francis Kenny's kind of I think Francis Kenny was the guy like the DP of like Clueless and things like that. You know what I mean? So the film didn't look like a Hellraiser film. It looked very kind of bright and overlit. And also I think Kevin had fought for some casting choices which weren't really working out. So I think Dimension were getting dailies and they didn't like it, which is not unusual because Bob doesn't tend to like anything he sees early on. What basically happened was we shot the movie. It was one of the most frustrating sets I've been on, in that we would sit around for hours and hours and hours doing nothing. And I just think they took a long time. I don't think Kevin was making his days. Basically, Kevin was having problems directing the film. His producer would come on set late at night and be like, where are we at? Why are you behind? What's going on? They fired the DP and brought in Jerry Lively, who'd been the DP on Hellraiser Hell on Earth. And to cut a long story short, after the 6-week shoot, which probably wasn't enough, it's never enough, but I don't think Kevin had got his ducks in a row and was behind. They finished the film, and I think there were concerns at Dimension about the project. So they asked Kevin to see the movie as quickly as possible. They said, can we see a rough cut? And Kevin is a DGA director. And DGA rules are that you get, I think it's 10 or 12 weeks before you have to show anything. And Kevin went toe-to-toe with Bob Weinstein and said, no, I'm not showing you anything. And Bob Weinstein said, no, I want to see some stuff. And he went, no, I'm not showing you anything. And I think they basically had a face-to-face screaming match. And Bob knew he couldn't, he wasn't going to get to see anything. But you don't go to war with Bob Weinstein over something like that because you're not going to win that fight. Basically, he's going to see it eventually. You would be much better off saying, you know what, give me a couple of weeks and I'll cut together some scenes for you and I'll show you. Get Bob on your side. He made a real enemy of Bob at that situation. As soon as Bob, the 10 or 12 weeks elapsed and Kevin showed his cut, Bob went, no, I hate it. And basically they got rid of him, and said, we're bringing in somebody else. And then Kevin went away and cried and moaned and said that, the world was against him and everybody hates him, but he hadn't done a very good job. So they brought in Joe Chappelle, who did The Curse of Michael Myers. And over the next year, we did 3 blocks of 2 weeks of reshoots. Basically, the entire film was almost reshot. The only stuff that's really existing from what Kevin shot is the modern day LA stuff, where the architect character, the entire opening sequence, all of that was all reshot and was redone. The birth of the Angelique character, that was all the demon possessing the girl. That was all shot by Joe Chappelle. And then most of the stuff on the space station was reshot and everything else. So really the only stuff that's existing is the kind of middle section, which honestly, it felt very TV episodic. It felt like someone who directed Tales from the Crypt. It looked like that. But Kevin had brought in a lot of his friends from Tales from the Crypt, and they weren't used to working nights on a horror film, and they got very pissed off, and people started leaving and complaining about the hours. And I was like, hey, man, it's cool. I'm having fun, right? And Kevin, bless his heart, kept coming to me and saying, you get this, you understand it. Like, there was parts of the set designed where they'd, made little lamps with barbed wire on them, and Kevin was like, explain to them what Hellraiser looks like. And I'd gone up to people and said, it should look like this. And they go, oh, we haven't watched any of those films. We don't watch Hellraiser movies. We're not interested in that kind of stuff. So when it came out, Kevin took his name off the film and went with the DGA assigned credit of Alan Smithy. And has since, because I've worked with Kevin since, has since manifested what happened, the events of what happened. He's molded it into his poor me scenario where everyone was against him. He was a genius and was making this incredible work of art. And I was there at the time, and it's like, yeah, actually, no, mate, you really weren't doing that great job, actually, so I know, sorry, but...
Working on a huge film like, you did Mission Impossible 2, I believe, and...
Well, Bloodline isn't a huge film. I think the budget on Bloodline, I think, was $6 million or $5.8 million, I believe.
No, I wasn't meaning Bloodline for it. I was actually about to contrast them. I was going to say, when you're working on a big budget movie like Mission Impossible 2 or like X-Men Wolverine, do you kind of, are you a bit more restricted when you've got a much bigger budget to work with? Like, are they a bit more, like, if a studio generally saying this is exactly what we want, or do you have a bit more independence?
The big difference on big budget films is, first of all, you get paid a lot more money, and the crew jacket's really nice, and the food's way better. But there's a lot of you have to stay in your lane. You really have to stay in your lane, and if you don't, you have to kind of fax and send several emails and request that you can have a chat with somebody about something, and it has to go through a process. Everything has to be done by a process. One of the most frustrating things about Sleepy Hollow was that things weren't open to interpretation. It had to be ran by Tim and then approved by a studio and blah, blah, blah. Whereas when you're doing a $2 million, $3 million horror film, if a director trusts you, they're kind of like, hey man, just make it cool. I'm semi-retired now. I don't really even do this stuff anymore. But the director that I still will work with every time is Patrick Lussier, who did, like I say, Dracula 2000 and the 2 Dracula sequels and Drive Angry. And, and Patrick, the reason I love working with Patrick is because he just like goes, dude, make it cool. And if it's a death scene, like, come up with something, right? Tell me, or he'll have an idea and then he'll say, what do you think? And I'll say, we're at this. And he'll say, yeah, we're at this. And it's a real collaborative effort. And sometimes, when you work on high budget films, you do get that, but there tends to be such a lot of people and so many cooks in the kitchen that it just takes the enthusiasm out of you. Sometimes you're just kind of like told to just, look, here's a picture of what we want. It's been approved by a studio. That's what it needs to look like. Don't change it, and just do your job. And yeah, you'll get more money, but I find it a bit more creatively restricted.
Now, before we get on to Revelations, I understand that you had some form of an idea for another Hellraiser that involved a priest I was reading about. Was this around about the time that Inferno was coming out? Is that the right sort of time?
Right after Bloodline. After Bloodline. So I had this idea for a film called Hellraiser Holy War. I'd become very friendly with one of the producers on Bloodline, and he basically, while the Kevin Yeager debacle was going down, we started confiding and talking, and I pitched him an idea for this thing called Hellraiser the Holy War. And he said, that's a kind of a cool idea, and I pitched him this whole opening sequence with this priest. And he liked it, and he said, you should have a meeting with Bob, and pitched to Bob. So they organized a meeting with Bob Weinstein, and that weekend, I had a meeting on the Monday, and on the Friday before, Scream came out. So I went into Bob's office on the Monday, and they said, oh, Bob's not here. He's actually in New York. He had to go back to New York. And I met with another exec, and they went, they don't care about Hellraiser anymore. They're more interested in Scream movies right now. So, that Hellraiser idea that you have, it's going to shit on a shelf. Right now, Hellraiser is the last thing that Bob Weinstein's interested in. He has such a bad taste in his mouth from the last experience that, sorry about that, mate. And it was like, so my hopes of a Hellraiser movie were dashed by Scream.
That must suck.
And it wasn't the first time it wouldn't be the only time that my Hellraiser hopes were dashed by Scream, as it would turn out. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I believe it was Scream 4 stopped you from directing Revelations.
Exactly. So I'm on Scream 4, working with the amazing Wes Craven. After, I finally get, the producer involved had worked with me on various movies and said, I really want you to meet Wes. And Wes's editor, Patrick, had said, I really want you to meet Wes, and Wes should use you. And Wes had used KMB for a long time, but he wanted to mix it up. So I met with Wes, and we had this amazing, amazing day together talking about movies and food and all sorts of stuff. And he was a real great person. And he asked me to do the effects on Scream 4. So we prepped the movie, and we go up to Michigan. I'm in Michigan, and I get a phone call from Joel Swastron, the producer, and he says, Gary, are you still interested in directing a Hellraiser movie? And I was like, fuck yeah, absolutely. He's like, we have to do a Hellraiser movie, and we have to do a Children of the Corn movie to retain the rights. And I was like, brilliant, I'm in, mate, And he's like, okay, we can only pay you this, and the budget's like $200,000. I was like, I don't care, it's a Hellraiser movie. I'll direct it if you've got $10 and a Betacam, you know what I mean? So he's like, do you have an idea for a script? And I was like, I think I do. It's got to be super cheap, right? And he's like, yeah. So I was like, yeah, how about this? And he's like, that sounds cool. Start writing. So he's like, yeah, you're going to write and direct it. We start shooting, we'll start shooting like 2 weeks after you get back from Scream. And I was like, yay. And then he called back, and he's like, we have to shoot like in 3 weeks' time. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, we have to shoot in 3 weeks' time. And I was like, can't you shoot Children of the Corn first and then do Hellraiser and like back to back? And he's like, no, they both have to shoot at the same time. He said, it's a rights issue thing. They have to, it's kind of been it's been an overlooked situation at Dimension. They haven't caught on to the fact that they're about to lose the rights. So this is what it is. And I was like, oh no. And he's like, yeah. I said, well, can we ask Bob if I can leave Scream? I'll send someone up here and I'll go and do Hellraiser. And they said, Bob's attitude is all, I think Andrew, whoever the exec was at the time, they said, we care about Scream. This is our $40 million, showbiz movie. We couldn't give a shit about Hellraiser Revelations, this $200,000 rights retainer. Yeah, you're more important to us doing Scream. So I was like, fuck, Scream kills me again.
It's adding new meaning to when Lance Henriksen says in Hellworld, if you need anything, just scream.
Scream, yeah.
With the Children of the Corn that came out at that point, I saw they used footage from Bad Boys 2 at one bit.
Oh, that's right, there's the road thing, that's right.
Yeah, it was, I imagine it's the same kind of attitude there of let's rush this thing through.
So I mean, I said, you said you still want to write it? And I said, yeah, and I basically held up in a hotel room for like, I had a concept for the script. I knew what I wanted to do. And I felt like I could write a kind of a really, I felt I could write a really tight little Hellraiser movie that was a real Hellraiser movie. The thing about the first Hellraiser that I've always loved is the purity and simplicity of that script. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a very simple story. To me, it's actually a gangster story. I've always said it's a gangster story. And people go, what do you mean it's a gangster story? And I say, if you imagine Frank's a guy who works for the mob, and the Cenobites are the mob, and he's basically worked for them doing some kind of deal with money, and then he steals the money and goes on the lam, and then he meets up with his old floozy and says, hey, take care of me, and then me and you'll run away together. We just need to escape the mob, you know, you've got help me get healthy, and then we'll run away together, I promise you, even though he's lying to her and he's going to sell her out to the mob as well, you know what I mean? And then it all gets kind of convoluted. But basically, the Cenobites, I always saw them as like the Vig collectors, you know what I mean? They're the evil, the henchmen of the mafia kind of thing, coming to get Frank. Very simple story, very simple love triangle, takes place in one house. So my idea was, if we have had these two teenagers who've gone missing, and it's a dinner party kind of like between the two families, and then you know they kind of get together every year because they're still talking, but there's a lot of tension between them and a kind of lot of, you know, blaming each other, but they're kind of like trying to get along. And then one of the kids turns up. He just turns up kind of in a daze, or clearly he's escaped his abductors, you know what I mean? He's bruised and battered and bleeding, and he's not making any sense. He's kind of like, you got to help me, protect me from them, protect them. And kind of parents are like, well, where's the other kid? What's gone on? And then as events unfold, you realize he's not the one kid, he's the other kid in the skin of the other one, and he's willing to do whatever he can to get away. And then you find out that the parents were fucking each other, and it's all this twisted stuff. And, you know, basically, you know, there's the underbelly. So I thought that can all be done as kind of like an Ibsen-esque kind of thing. Like you keep it all in one, in a house. I'd never written any of that fucking, you know, found footage camera, two teens going to fucking Mexico shit that's in it. I'd done it all as like, it's just a dinner party, you know, at a house. And then events unfold, you know.
That found footage bit really irritated me because they're running it throughout the film kind of in parallel. And the thing is, the audience know basically what's happening because they've seen a Hellraiser film before. And it's like 2/3 of the way through the movie, we're still getting like, ooh, plot twist, this box, and so on.
No,
and
it
was totally needless.
It was written kind of like, you know, as a Hellraiser movie for Hellraiser fans. So you didn't need to have it explained to you. It's kind of like, why we're at this dinner party and what's going on. And then that, you know, the only thing they've got to go on is this video footage that's kind of grainy, and you can hear voices on it, and we don't know what's going on. And then kind of like this kid turns up, and it's like it peels back like an onion kind of thing after that, you know what I mean? And ends up with this big showdown where he's going to basically kill the parent. It was the guy who was fucking his mom, you know, and all that, and then basically sell them all out, you know, to escape. It was really a riff on the first film.
I was going to just say, Tom, I thought it sounds like the premise of the film Carnage with starring Jodie Foster, and it just seemed like an interesting setup. Right. If it had gone the way maybe that's more envisioned.
Yeah. Look, I mean, you know, I wrote it over 3 days. I gave it to the producers. They said, this is really, really good. You know, we're actually pretty happy with this. We want to do a little polish on it. And I was like, they like, do you want to do it? And I was like, no, you know, I'm kind of working on Scream. I'm exhausted anyway. I'm not going to be directing it. So, and they said, we've got this director, you know, and he called me and said, I love the script and I'm really excited. And he was a big fan of the Hellraiser franchise. And then my guys did the effects. And the first hint of worry I really had was that Mike Regan called me and said, dude, I've just seen the guy that cast as Pinhead. He's got a really strange shaped head, you know. He's got like a very bulbous forehead. It's going to look weird in the makeup. And I was like, Hey, I'm not directing it. What can I do? You know what I mean? And it's like, that was it. And then
recasting Doug must have always been a tough call to make.
Well, no. Well, I got the call. They called me and said, "Hey, will you call Doug Bradley and talk to Doug Bradley?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, and I'd actually on Hellworld and Deader, they'd asked me to talk to Doug because they said we've got this much money, and basically they said this is how much money we have to pay Doug Bradley for Pinhead. If he doesn't, we're telling you right now, we've been told if he just turns it down, they'll recast. So I had to negotiate with Doug and say, this is how much it is, Doug. And he was like, really? And I was like, it wasn't a bad amount of money for the amount of time he did on set. Not what he deserves, because, he's Pinhead, But they'd said to Ben, I'd said, look, I'm talking. He's like, well, why are you talking to me about it and not the producers? I said, because they're very kind of like, here's how much we're going to offer you. There's no discussion. If you don't want to do it, we'll recast. And I was just like, look, Doug, they're going to recast. And he's like, they're joking. I was like, no, they're not joking. They are deadly serious. So when we got to Revelations, they said, will you call Doug Bradley and ask him if he wants to do it? And I said, well, how much have you got to pay him? And they said $6,000. And I went, you're fucking kidding me. $6,000. I said, that's ridiculous. And they said, well, we have $200,000 for the movie. That's kind of what we have for Pinhead. We don't have any money. There just isn't there. We can't give them $100,000 or $50,000 because then we won't be able to make a film. So we're already, strung up. So will you make the call? So I called Doug, and it was horrible, really, because it's like you're having to call somebody who's a friend and say, hey, so here's the deal, And I told him what the script was like and what the script was about, and he was like, oh, it doesn't sound great. And I was like, I said honestly, it's kind of. This is what it is, but this is how much they're willing to pay you. And he was like, what? He said, that's fucking ridiculous. And I said, no, it is. He said, I'm not doing it for that much money. He said, I'm not doing it for that much money. He said, that's an insult. And I said, no, I don't blame you. And when I called him back and I said, he won't do it. I said, he's insulted. He's genuinely insulted, as he should be. I said, I'm sure he makes more than that in a weekend selling 8x10s. So why is he going to come and do it? I think all I'd said to him was like, hey, it'll give you something new to talk out at conventions, and it'll have, something new to talk about because it's been a while since you did the Hellraiser movie. I said, so, and it'll be great to have you in it. I said, I can't imagine anyone else doing it. And I think the only reason he pondered it for maybe the split second that he did was that he genuinely thought, do I really want somebody else playing this role? And I'm sure that there's part of that is, do I want somebody else playing this role? And there's a little bit of his, 5% of that is somebody going to do a better job than me? And, which would be impossible to do because he's great in the character. But obviously, I think Stephen Smith Collins was a very, very poor choice. I think he was directed badly in the role. And then the idea to dub him was even worse. So, all around, it was a chewing the scenery kind of performance. Certainly not what I would have done with it. The film isn't the way I would have directed it. Like I say, Carlos, bless his heart, big Hellraiser fan, was really excited to be doing it, knew he was compromised by the time, but gave it his best shot. But it certainly isn't the film I would have made. I think I could have made a better film or a more grittier film, that's for sure. I think he made some bad casting choices by casting it's his wife or his girlfriend as one of the female roles, if you want to know who his wife is. And if you think of the actors in the film, the one that seems to be hysterically crying all the time, that's his wife. And I think the film suffers from not being reined in. I think the performances are all over the place and the casting's a bit poor. So, my guys did the effects on it. And and apart from Pinhead, which is nothing to do with the technical aspects of the makeup, it was just the face that it's gone onto, unfortunately. It was a difficult face to work with to make him look. You need somebody with kind of a square jaw and or a face that you can enhance. And Stephen didn't have that kind of a face. But I think all of the other makeup effects, considering the makeup effects budget was $7,000, I think actually it was pretty damn good.
Wow.
There's a few Cenobites in there. And again, that's purely because my guys did it as a labor of love. And, I think the boxes look nice. And, the costumes, apart from Pinhead's costume, which, again, they were scrambling to make it fit him, you know what I mean?
The whole turnaround time, it was about 6 weeks or so that it took for the script after the script to get the film.
Oh yeah, I think it was. I wrote it, then 2 weeks later they shot it, and here's the deal. I went away to do Scream 4 2 weeks after I was there, I got the call. When I came back, I was given a copy of the movie to watch.
That's quick. That's
And
quick.
Did they keep you updated on like the story changes or anything?
All I know is I got back. They said, "Here's a copy to look." I went into the studio to meet the guys and was like, "Hey," and they're like, "Hey," and Carlos was like, "So nice to meet you," and I was like, "Hey," and they're all happy and we were really happy with it. And then I took it home and watched it, and first thing I did was call my buddy Mike and say, "What the fuck? Why didn't you stop the director with Stephen doing all of this pain? The suffering." I was like, "What?" He's like, "I know, man." He said, "I couldn't say anything." I was like, "What on earth?" And he said, "Well, I didn't have the heart to tell you when you were up in Michigan." He said, you would have had a meltdown." I was like, "Oh my God, we're going to get raped over this." You know what I mean? And then they kept doing all those weird inserts of cutting back to Pinhead and stuff during the movie. It's like, what, is Pinhead in the box or something? Like, what's going on here? Like, it makes no sense. So, it was awful. And then, of course, it came out, and I got the feeling that Doug was like, ha, 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 now I can just go to town on what a bag of shit this was. And then Clive weighed in saying, this is, not, I think he said something like, "It's not from my asshole," or something like this, which I always think is kind of funny because history forgets things so easily. And lest we forget that Clive happened to write Rawhead Rex and Transmutations, or Underworld, before he managed to make Hellraiser. So there were two movies out there directed by George Pavlo, which are no great movies of their own, bastardized versions of his scripts. So I mean, what happened to him, I had happened to me on Revelations. But what I will say is, I'm actually surprised how, and this is shocking to me, when I watch these kind of people do their countdown of favorite Hellraiser movies, or worst, least to favorite, or what rating Hellraiser movies, the Revelations is quite often in some people's, it's not the bottom of the list. I'm always really surprised. I'm like, some people are like, "I actually kind of like it. I actually don't mind that film." I'm like, "Really?" And they're like, "Yeah, And they're not telling me this. They're not saying it to me. So they're not kind of like, suckling at the teat. This is people leaving their unbiased kind of like ratings videos on YouTube. So I've actually seen videos where I'm like, obviously number 10 is going to be at Revelations, and it's not. And I'm always really shocked. And people go, "Well, I do feel like it's actually a genuine Hellraiser movie. And had they had some more time and some money and maybe a little bit of effort gone into it, it could have actually been okay." So, weird.
Yeah, on my list, it wasn't number 10. So I did an article about the article we while ago. It was number 9. I think the main reason that, the main thing for me it has over Hellworld is, as you say, it feels Hellraiser. You've got the skin suits again. You've got
and that's
a
why I
small
wrote
family dynamic.
Yeah, and see, this is what I will say. I forgot it, but I truly believe, and I will go to, I will die on the hill on this. I think that moment when he says, "I would have given you the shirt off my back," and he knocks him out and goes flick with the knife and goes, "It's not the shirt off your back I want." I think that's as bit as Hellraiser as you can possibly get.
Yeah, I can imagine Frank. I can imagine that as a Frank sort of line.
Totally right. Well, I wrote it as being a Frank line. It's like, it's not this shirt off your back I want, flick, and then you see him in the mirror doing the thing with the skin. It's like, yeah, to me that was a very Hellraiser-esque thing. So I think people who could see through the veil could say, "Oh, I can see the love in there." It's easy to just kind of like pan things. That's why I've rarely got time for people who kind of just like leave one-word critiques for the movie. The weird thing is that a few years after the movie had come out, somebody fairly known to Doug came to me and actually said, "I can't say this around Doug, but I actually kind of like Revelations," and they're like, had Doug been in it, it probably would have actually not been a bad film, and if a different director had taken a handle on it. So, shoulda, coulda, woulda, maybe it would have been, but I certainly thought, well, that's it. That was definitely my last chance of doing a Hellraiser movie. that ship has sailed. Never again will they ask me to do anything. So I was very shocked when things changed again.
Before we move on, I just got an interesting question about like the mythos of Hellraiser, and we've always had this sort of, I think in the first film, he was a cricket-eating hobo guy who sort of transforms into this big skeleton at the very end of the film.
Yeah, it's
And
always
one thing-
amazing to me that talking about that people always, regard Hellraiser as this perfect movie that's absolutely perfect in every way. Yet they always forget kind of rickety, dragony, crappy puppet flying off at the end of the box.
Well, it's
There
interesting.
was that bit you always go, oh yeah, I forgot about this shit at the end of the movie.
I guess you're kind of answering my question there, because it's always the most unexplained aspect of the mythos of Hellraiser, and if there had been the budget, because there was a lot of the homeless man, sort of the guardian of the box, if you will, appearing in Revelations. Was there anything you're wanting to do with that character?
The derelict. Well, I mean, I wrote him into Revelations. The derelict was that character, the derelict, who's in, he's in the first film. He's in part 3, obviously, and then and I said, yeah, let's bring him back. So I mean, the character that they meet in the bar, who kind of sells them the box, he's totally supposed to be that character. Even the way he's looked, the long hair and the straggly beard. So in Revelations, that character was totally meant to be that same guy.
Was there any point, because he gets hit with a shotgun blast, was there any considerations of if there was the budget, and had you maybe directed it yourself, of doing a superior version of the dragon skeleton monster?
No, I would never have done that. Again, it's one of those things that I was. It's like there are several movies in my life that I edit in my brain. So if you ask me to tell you the story of Hellraiser, the first movie, I would never involve that scene. It's always like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. To me, it's like the movie. I know this is going to sound like a complete shift of gears, but the movie Heat. Like I always imagine the movie. I will turn it off when I watch it. I will turn off Heat when Robert De Niro and the girl drive into the tunnel away from it. I'll turn it off because it makes no sense for him to go back and go and fight with Alec Pacino. It's like, why would he go back for Waingro? You just have someone kill Waingro years later on. Like he's got away with it. You've won. You've got the girl. You've got the money. You're going to go off and live the life. But now you're going to compromise it, which is everything that you said you wouldn't do for the last 2 hours, and now you're going to go on a vengeance thing. This is exactly what your character's not about. So it's like I edit it out in my brain. Same as Casino Royale. I never remember the Vesper Lynn drowning sequence. I always think the movie ends when he's escaped the torture sequence with the guy smashing his balls. It's kind of, to me, the film finishes there. So.
It's got multiple endings, that film, yeah.
The first Hellraiser, I always strategically edit that perfect movie with not having the, especially with that horrible claw insert of it grabbing the box, flying off, in the point of view camera. So I never have the... I
always sort of viewed because there's a lot of the sound effect of flapping wings in the first film, and I always assumed that was like a setup for the unveiling of the skeleton creature. I could see maybe Clive Barker had something better in his mind for what was then put in the end of the film.
You'd have to ask the great man himself for that one. I don't know. Again, don't get me wrong. I adore Hellraiser and was a fan. Still am a fan. Will always be a fan of the first film. I think amongst the ton of dross that was kind of being produced in that age in the video time of horror films, Hellraiser stood out. It was completely unique at the time. It was very British, although they tried to come off as this American movie. To me, it felt essentially very English. And we had this great kind of romantic lead character akin to Dracula. And the one thing I would say as well is that I'm always stunned the fact that Hellraiser 1 and Hellraiser 2 look and feel so incredibly similar, even though they were shot several years later. And Hellraiser 2 definitely suffered from budget cuts. They literally had their budget cut, like weeks before they shot. I think that was due to the financial collapse at the time. There was a big finance, 87, you know what I mean? I think when finances hit the shitter, it kind of really affected. So their budget got halved overnight. But I still think it's amazing what Tony Randall achieved in that film, because it looks and feels like they were shot back to back. They really
it does. Yeah.
And that's why I'm not a huge fan of Hellraiser Hell on Earth, because I always think that Hellraiser Hell on Earth takes a complete left turn. You've got these two films that look and feel very kind of like a certain way and have their own very visual style that you can really lock into, and then you've got this MTV Hellraiser 3 movie, which wasn't supposed to be directed by Tony Hickox. I mean, Tony had literally just done Waxworks 2, and the producers had a falling out with Tony Randall, and Bob Keane, I think, said, I've just done Waxworks 2 with Tony Hickok, so I can recommend him heartily. And so Tony came in at the last minute and took over.
We move on now from Revelations to Judgment. So Revelations, I mentioned, was number 9 on my ranking list. Judgment is number 4 on my ranking list. I really like this. I really like this film. It's for me, aside from the original trilogy, this is absolutely the best Hellraiser film. And I guess what I'm wondering is, what went right? Because with this one here, I know it was also done to keep for rights, but it looks like there's a much longer pre-production period that you had to work with.
I think I got the call in November and we were shooting in February. So, again, same producer as Revelations. He literally called and said, hey, look, I'm really sorry. It's not the film you should be directing. It's not the budget you should have, but they've got a little bit more money. Are you still interested in doing the Hellraiser thing? And I was like, yeah, absolutely I am. In fact, I have a script. I'd written a script before, which I'd taken all of the Hellraiser stuff out of, because I didn't think I could get it made. And he was like, great, well then, let's pitch it to Dimension. So I pitched it to them and they said, absolutely not. That sounds dreadful. We hate the sound of this script, and I was like, really? And I wrote another pitch. I did a 3-page, 4-page synopsis with the judgment, the audit and everything else. And they were like, no, sounds terrible. We hate this. What's all this vomit and skinning people and this guy with the typewriter and he's not a Cenobite? Just give us a horror film. And I was like, look, guys, I did a Hellraiser film with Revelations. I wrote what I thought was a traditional Hellraiser film. I give up. The fans slaughtered me for that. I've decided, rather than owning a restaurant where I try and figure out what everyone wants to eat and go, maybe they want more pepper on that, maybe they need more ketchup, maybe they want the bun like this. You know what? I'm going to make a hamburger for me, I'm going to make it the way I want to eat it. And if somebody else gets a slice of it and they say, this is pretty tasty, then fantastic. But I'm going to make it for me. And I think I'm going to do something different and have a different mythology and bring some different characters into it. And they were like, yeah, that sounds great, but no, you're not going to do it. And I was like, oh, fantastic. So I think I wrote another synopsis. And while I was at it, I wrote a really kind of Hellraiser synopsis called Hellraiser Enter Darkness, which was kind of like, for young psych students working for this kind of like doctor exploring the avenues of the mind, kind of like Chenard kind of stuff. And they read that and were like, that's fantastic. Let's make Enter Darkness. That's the movie for us. And I said, guys, you're wrong. I said, I really believe Judgment is the one to do. And the studio said, okay, well, here's the deal. If you believe that to be the case, then you write Hellraiser Judgment. But if we don't like it, then you will write Enter Darkness for free. And I went, okay, because I'm a mug. So I went away and wrote it. I think I took about 3 weeks and wrote the script. And then I sent it to them and kind of sat there and had to go into a boardroom Zoom call, and they all filed in. And luckily one of the execs said, so we read this Judgment script. We kind of get it now. This is okay. Obviously it needs some work, and obviously we have notes, but we see where you're going with this now. So they went on board, but they still took a lot of stuff out of it, even up till the very end. I mean, we'd finished shooting the film and they were like, we've been thinking about it. This whole audit thing, we should maybe just lose all of that stuff, lose the whole audit thing. And I was like, are you guys mental? Are you mental? Are you mad? And they were like, yeah, it's just a bit weird, this thing, you know what I mean? And I was like, oh, please, guys, I'm telling you, the audit stuff's the best stuff in it. And they were like, yeah, we kind of like the detective story. And I'm like, oh, God almighty. So it was a fight. I don't understand why they kept cutting it down. My original cut was like 120 minutes. It was like, But, yeah, we did have a little bit more time, and the script was batted around, kept going back and forth. I was having to jump through hoops all the time. And what was really frustrating is that Dimension were going through all kinds of financial problems at the time. So they were changing executives on me literally every 3 weeks. So like I'd get into a meeting with like two guys, and they go, you need to do this and this and this, and we don't like this and we don't like that. And then 3 weeks later, I'd meet some new guys who were in charge, and they're like, we don't like this, we don't like that. And I go, well, that isn't the way it was. It was like this before. Oh, well, that sounds better. You know, I was going, yeah, that's what I wrote that 3 weeks ago. Yeah, well, we're going to change it back to that. And then they get fired, and 3 weeks later, someone go, I don't like this thing here. And be like, oh, for the love of God. So it was all very frustrating. The only thing that was decent about it was that I knew what the effects were, so I could prep the effects. And even though I had a very limited budget, I knew I could shoot the effects how I wanted them, and I could build the things so that, like, you know, if you're shooting at building an effect, sometimes you have to build the front and the back and the sides because the director might want to shoot it from behind. I knew how I was going to shoot it, so I knew what I could get away with and what elements I could lose and what I could get away with, just, you know, throwing a cat suit on a girl and putting a gas mask on it, you know what I mean, and stuff like that, and where I could get away with those things and what things I could buy. And I was very conscious about, because the budget was so low, trying to up the ante by making sure that props were decent. So often when you're on a low budget film, you know, a poor prop person will get hired and it's like, okay, I need some spit vials and I need this and I need a knife. And they just go down to Target or to Walmart and they go and buy some pieces and it looks like shit. Because I had the time and I was writing the script, I could go on eBay and search out antique pieces. And I tried to make sure that everything had a nice look to it, you know, and I art departmented a lot of things and built a lot of things for the film. So like the typewriter and the, you know, all the details to try and up the quality of it a little bit, you know what I mean?
I know it's a low budget film, but it doesn't look like one. I think the whole first half hour or so where you've got, as you said, the audit sequence, you've got a lot going on in the house. It looks amazing. It's
$400,000 until 2 weeks before the movie. And then they said, because I was like, what's my budget? And they said, $400,000. That's how much you've got. I said, 400,000, right? I don't have to pay anybody anything. They're like, no. You have $400,000 to make the movie. And it was like, okay. And I had a brilliant producer, Mike Leahy. And, you know, he was getting deals from everywhere he possibly could. And then literally, I think 2 or 3 weeks before, he said, our budget just got cut by $50,000. And I was like, why? He said, they turned out they hadn't paid Clive Barker his rights. So we have to write a check for $50,000 to Clive Barker. And it was like, yay, $50,000, which when you're making a film for $400,000 is a lot of money. So it's a miracle. I mean, I really have to give huge kudos to Mike Leahy, who stood behind the project, which was hard for him because he's actually a very religious guy, and he had a real problem with some of the religious aspects of the film. But he went to bat and got great deals on things and got hotels for super prices, and the car at the opening he got for free, and made sure we were all fed really well. And having a great producer like that really, really helps. But it was super low budget, $350,000.
Because you've got a lot of the sort of torture-y bits at the beginning, like it sounds like some of the problems, most of the problems that they had with you doing this were based upon this section, the audit part. Like, was that? But there's so many striking images within that. Like, was that for yourself as a director? What kind of influences did you have there?
I mean, I tried to infuse the film. It's going to sound very pompous now, I guess, but I mean, I was definitely trying to. I would look at pictures by Francis Bacon and also by Hieronymus Bosch. I was trying to kind of give that kind of weird imagery to it. Definitely Cronenberg, definitely Fincher. I wanted it to be kind of bizarre. I mean, originally the film doesn't start with the audit. It doesn't start with the audit. The film actually starts with the girl coming home into her apartment. The audit's not until like originally about 25 minutes later on. Saying that, I'd originally written it with the audit at the beginning, originally. I just thought we'll have 12 minutes or 15 minutes of just complete weirdness and then do titles. And the studio were like, no way. Like, this makes no sense at all. It's this weird guy interviewing somebody. And they were like, get straight into the cop story. And I was like, oh, great, okay. So I had to rejuggle the whole story around. And then when we shot it and they saw it, they were like, hey, let's try putting the audit at the beginning. And I was like, oh, what a great idea. Wish I'd have thought of that, which I actually like because it's more kind of European or Asian. But again, I changed certain elements of the story and some of the transitions. I'd done some really nice transitions from the original, the way it was shot, like the originally the cop is watching the TV and it transitions to a TV in the room of Carl Watkins, and you get to see Carl Watkins' whole room with all the children. He got children's booties pinned to the walls, and and the place is just like a child porn kind of nightmare. You know what I mean? He was just a really creepy character and establishes a lot without him saying anything. Whereas now in the cut, all you see is an envelope and this guy scurry into frame. So it took out some of the kind of like the poeticness of it, if you like. I know it sounds again lofty, but no, I was with the look of it. And also with the writing, using Dickens in there a lot, and the religious stuff. I really researched Ecclesiastes and some of the lines from the Bible to really make sure it worked, but also the Dickensian stuff as well. I was trying to give it a bit of gravitas because I'm a bit of a moron, really, so I was trying to do that.
Just add what you were saying. It really does actually work very well because you're introducing something that hasn't appeared in the Hellraiser series before. It's the Stygian Inquisition, I believe it's called, and introducing that right at the very start, it's ideal. That's exactly where that intro should be, then because the audience know what's what and what to expect.
Originally, the way it was written was. Originally, what happens is in the original script I wrote years ago was it starts off with Watkins being audited. So it's like 15 minutes of the whole process. And then it cuts to a cop knocking on the door, like a cop pulling up, and he's going around the areas and the houses, and he's kind of looking for this Carl Watkins. Have you seen this kind of man? And he knocks on the door of the house. And he says, I'm looking for this man. And they go, oh, yeah, we can tell you about him. Come in. And then the idea was to do another 20-minute audit. So it's like the idea was that the audience would go through this 15 minutes of like, oh, my God, what the hell is this disgusting thing we just watched? And then when the cop goes in, have the audience go, oh, we're not going to do this again, are we? And go, yeah, we're going to do it again. We're going to do the whole thing again, and see if they could stomach it kind of thing. But then as the audit happens, something goes wrong, and you think that you think what's happening is that they're tasting innocence, and that's what's kind of making them sick and making them ill, is that it's innocence, it's pure innocence. But it turns out he's the most darkest of them all. You know what I mean? He's worse than anything they've ever encountered. But the idea was to make you believe that it could be innocence, which is why Jaffiel steps in and says, no, send him back. You think, hopefully, you think that he's a good man. He's done the right thing. He's not a bad guy. I mean, I've had a lot of people who've said, oh, it's obvious he's the Preceptor. He's obviously the Preceptor. But we kept showing it to people all the way. I screened it to a bunch of people and said, and I'd stop the movie 20 minutes in and go, who, any ideas on who the killer might be? And they all thought it was the other brother. They all thought it was the clean-cut brother. So I love when people are online going, oh, I could totally see it was him, man. Like, I knew straight away. It's like, you're a lying sack of shit. It's like those people who say, I saw Scream and I knew it was, the two guys. It's like, you're a liar.
Films like that and Scream, it's only ever really your best guess.
Yeah.
It's because you never really know until it's been revealed.
I mean, I did try to leave. There are hints in there. Obviously, if you look, he gets the biblical quotes right every time. And then there's a thing where he talks about the lights. He says, I get migraines, it's like, oh, yeah, so he's getting migraines. He knows religious stuff, like, yeah, it's a little bit obvious, but, hey, what can you do?
Just when you know what to look for.
Yeah. I personally didn't get, because it's a bit like, actually just like Scream, where you sort of raise the possibility of it being him and then dismiss it. Yep. So that then becomes a twist when you go, oh, shit.
That's why it's really annoying when people comment on it without watching the film, because there's actually I thought a fairly cleverly written scene where she's in the car with him and she says, do you have any, have you reported this? And he says, oh, only this. And she says more about that line from Dickens. And he says, well, I didn't think it was, is this the most popular book in the world after all? And then the guy said, brother said, I haven't found anything. So every time you thought it was like, aha, we've got him. It's like he that usurped it before or had come up with something. So I tried along the way. So it's a bit annoying when people are like, they just go, oh, it was so obvious that it was him. But I didn't think it was. I thought I put enough kind of like hid enough where we didn't kind of give it away that he could just be a really, really good guy, that he wasn't innocent.
We got to mention Paul T. Taylor, who I thought was a really good Pinhead in this.
Yeah.
Like, in a way, the role of Pinhead's a bit of a poison chalice, because if you take it, you're going to be compared to Doug Bradley. But I thought that he did a really good job of making the role his own. What were you looking for in your Pinhead?
Oh, I told Paul straight away when I hired him. I said, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, mate. I said, you're going to be hated and loved. And it was actually after my turn in No More Souls, somebody briefly for a second said, "Hey, have you thought about playing Pinhead?" And I was like, "Oh, are you mad? I'm already, public enemy number one. They'll absolutely murder me if I play fucking Pinhead." What did I look for? Honestly, first and foremost, it's weird. If you hire a plumber tomorrow, right, when a plumber comes to your house, you don't say, "Okay, I've got 3 plumbing exercises for you to do here before you plumb my kitchen. So show me that you can fix a tap. Show me that you can do this. Show me you can do that." So when I saw Paul's audition tape, I was like, "Oh, this guy can clearly act. He's an actor. He can clearly act." And he'd actually auditioned. We had them audition for the role of the auditor. We didn't tell him it was Pinhead. So he did the auditor, and he did it with an English voice. And so straight away, I was like, oh, clearly the guy can act. That's a done for. And I know I can direct him. Secondly, it was really 50-50 physically how his face looked. And what I saw was a guy who looked a little bit like Peter Cushing, or Ralph Fiennes, who got kind of a square jaw. And I just said straight away, the makeup will look really nice on him. I can make the makeup look Doug Bradley-esque. It will look like Pinhead. He has a very similar bone. Actually, Doug has a very rounded face, and we square out his jaw. But I just thought Paul had strong features. And thirdly, he was really enthusiastic. He bought his own Hellraiser box, like you showed me your Hellraiser box at the beginning. Paul, on his audition tape, he'd figured out it was a Hellraiser movie, and he got his Hellraiser box with him and his little Pinhead character. So I thought, you know what? This is going to be a 3-week shoot that's going to be really hard to do. I need everybody to just be really enthusiastic and really into it. And that's what Paul had. He was really bubbly and really kind of like, he was jazzed. And I thought, he's not going to be sitting in a corner moaning and grumbling and saying, "Oh, well, I should be doing this and I should be doing that. And why am I only getting paid this?" He was just excited to be there. And so I knew he'd do a good job. And there were times he'd get a little bit big on set occasionally. He'd start to ramp up. And we had kind of a little code word. I would just do that one line from Star Wars that Peter Cushing says to Princess Leia when he says, "You're far too trusting." And he says that, to her, you're far too trusting. It's far too far away for us to make it. Just, and I would just go to Paul if he's getting a bit big. I'd go, "You're far too trusting," and he would immediately bring it down. And I'd go, "He's a powerful character who you don't have to scream, you don't have to shout. You're Pinhead. Everyone's listening to you, and your face is already doing so much work that the merest brow lift will do it." And I said, how tall is he? How lean is he? Is he thin? And all those kind of came into play. But he knocked it out of the park. I thought he did a fantastic job, and had a lot of pressure on his shoulders, obviously, because Doug's established that character and owns that character and is Pinhead and is the voice of Pinhead. But I think if you're going to have a second choice, then I think Paul's pretty bloody good. And clearly that's been the case, because everywhere you look, I've never seen a nasty comment about Paul. The only people who ever had a problem with Paul and said anything nasty were people from Doug's camp. But fans seem to like him. I mean, he certainly enjoys his fair share of signing 8x10s and doing all that stuff. And I think he's relished playing the role. And I really hoped that they would call him maybe if they did a new show, because he's a young guy and he could do it. And I was very happy with what Paul did. And a thoroughly nice guy as well. Just a nice guy, a really genuinely nice guy who turned up and was scared and worried and had a bit of a panic attack on the first day, and was just he just wanted to do good. All he was like, "Please, I just want to do good, please, sir." But I thought he did great, and he that's why as well, when I designed his costume and his makeup, I made a few little changes to his costume and to his makeup, because I felt he should have his own makeup and his own costume that belonged to that version of Pinhead.
I was watching a Blu-ray earlier today, and this is something that I've never seen on a horror Blu-ray before: a gag reel, which I thought was great fun. Now, I never imagined everyone just having a bit of a laugh on set. I figured there'd always be a kind of, all right, we've got to keep a grave tone. Like, was it? Like, are horror films always like that, where it's just a good laugh while you make them?
Yeah, usually the laughs come out of the most ridiculous situations. You know what I mean? I think actually, if you look at the gag reel, most of it's me being stupid, usually, and me getting people to do stupid things, like usually in the middle of a take yelling "dance" or or just that. It's a bit like when I was a singer in a band. I would say to the guys in the band, I would say, I'm going to walk up to you while we're playing a song, and I'm going to say something. You should laugh at it like it's a joke, and then we'll laugh, and I'll laugh back at you. And they go, why? And I go, if the audience think we're having a good time, then they'll have a good time. You know what I mean? Like, they'll feel like we're having a good laugh, even though it's bullshit. But I think you try and make a set to be a light and happy environment. Shooting Hellraiser Judgment was fantastic. It was an absolutely blazing experience. And I don't think there's a single person. There might be one costume assistant who probably had a bit of a problem on the film. Everybody else was so happy and had such a good time. Testimony to that is I could be dreaming this, but the first weekend we had off, the first Saturday, we shot for 5 days, and then we had the weekend off. I said to my producer, I said, we own the camera, right? It's our camera. And he's like, yeah, it's yours all weekend. And I said, look, I don't want to just do credits on black, white letters on black credits. I said, let's shoot something. And he said, well, what do you want to shoot? And I said, I've got the typewriter. I'm the auditor. I said, we'll go in and we'll just type some stuff, and I'll put the names of the credits on the thing. We'll burn the pages. And I said to the DP, I said, do you mind coming in? Just me and you. We'll come in for a couple of hours on Saturday, and we'll shoot the typewriter, and we'll shoot an opening credit sequence. We'll shoot light bulbs and all that. And he was like, no, I can do that. So I roll in on the Saturday, and I get there, and there's like 8 people there, 9 people, grips and electric. And I was like, said to my producer, I was like, what's going on? Like, did you pay the guys? He's like, no. He said they heard you were doing it, and they wanted to come in for free because they were having such a good time. And then it happened every weekend, and we'd shoot inserts, and so yeah, I think sometimes and I'm pretty stupid, so I would do silly things, and like this, like, you can't tell on the gag reel, but there's a scene when Randy's coming into the building with his gun and stuff, and someone walks up to him with a bag and like an orange and a can of Pepsi, and it's his mum. His mum came to visit. So I said, quick, here, grab this. Halfway through the day, go and give him his lunch. And she's like, what? I said, just go and give him his lunch. So like she walks up and she's like, I've got your lunch for you, sweetie. And he's like, what are you doing? It's like, just silly stuff, because why not? I think the crew need to enjoy themselves while they're at it. And sometimes shooting, especially shooting horror stuff, it can be pretty gross stuff, you know what I mean? When we did the audit, when we did the spitting and the licking and the spitting, I had 2 grips. 2 grips. Grips are usually the biggest, roughest looking dudes on the film. They're the ones who carry everything. I had 2 grips walk off set and say, I can't be here for this. And I had a girl almost pass out. You know what I mean? They were like, this is crazy. Even though they knew it was egg yolk we were using, just egg white, whites of eggs. People were like, this is fucked up, and trust me, it's supposed to be a lot worse than what you saw. But no, I think, so when we're actually shooting, I would actually say to my script supervisor, gag reel. Or I'd say to her, I'm going to do something stupid now. I'm going to, like that last take with Paul that we did when, we're talking, we shall seek out the souls of the innocents. And he says, so those are the souls we shall seek out first. And I go, yeah, so let's get at it then, eh? And he's like, yeah, mate, let's do it. I think it's always funny when you see these characters that are supposed to be menacing and horrifying suddenly break and say something in a very normal way. To me, it's quite funny. I love that one where Paul just goes, oh, I've forgotten my line. Great, I think again, in the same way that if you watch a band and you see the people on stage playing and having a good time, it makes you think, oh, they enjoy doing that. I would want people to watch Hellraiser Judgment, a pretty intense movie with some pretty gross stuff in it, but then hopefully watch the gag reel and go, oh, it looks like they had a good time on that. I think the 2 things I'd like people to take away watching it are, they look like they had a good time, and B, that was made by somebody who really gives a shit. That was made by a guy who really actually gave a damn about Hellraiser and wanted to do something a bit different. And I mean, I hung it out there. I mean, I didn't know people would take the Auditor and playing the Auditor as well. I mean, Jesus Christ, the stick I got for that, you wouldn't believe. Some people were like, how dare you play the Auditor? You're so arrogant, and, you know, who does he think he is? And clearly he's sending a message to Doug Bradley that he's, you know, it's like, furthest thing couldn't be from my mind. You know, in fact, originally I really looked forward to the idea of me and Doug having scenes together. You know, and it's not like I'm not an actor. I haven't acted before. I had acted. I did come from an acting background. So it wasn't like I was, you know, saying I want to be the lead guitarist of Van Halen and I don't know how to play. You know what I mean? I think I can act, and I knew what I could do for the role.
The Auditor character certainly comes across well, and like the face design, the heavy shades that were being worn there. But I always interpreted it as something like akin to, like, say, when Brad Bird is voicing Edna Mose in the Incredibles series, like sometimes a director can step in and play a role.
Well, sometimes it's easier as well, because it means I don't have to cast it. So I didn't have to cast it in that I knew that I could do the makeup early and design the makeup, because it was only a secondary character and we were shooting in Oklahoma. So we couldn't afford to fly actors to LA to get them head cast. So I knew by me doing it, I could do the makeup in advance and prep it and knew it would fit me and everything else. Secondly, you know, I knew I'd do it for scale. You know, I was there all the time, so we could do inserts and additional photography if we needed to. And I think I had a good idea of how I wanted the performance to be anyway. And it just took more pressure off me in that I didn't have to, I wasn't dealing with another unknown quantity, you know what I mean? So often, you know, people often wonder why directors will cast the same actors again in films, you know, like why Tim works with Johnny and people like that. Sometimes, you know, filmmaking's a struggle even at a high budget level. And if you have an actor you've worked with and you know what they can do and you know the pros and cons, it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't. And sometimes, you know, you can get to a real sticky situation sometimes with actors, you know. So, again, it was one of those things where I don't have to worry about this character. I mean, obviously, it was a lot of work for me, and it necessitated me coming in very, very early, some days off the clock to get ready. And then I would have to be in makeup and directing while Paul was getting his makeup on. So it was quite odd for the cast and crew to be directed by a guy with slashes all over his face, you know what I mean? And I'm very hands-on, so I'm dressing the set and I'm kind of hanging chains up and all of that. But it just meant I was there kind of all the time. And again, the wardrobe fit me. We knew what you know, because for those characters, we did the wardrobe. You know, we did the wardrobe for, you know, the Auditor and for the Butcher and the Surgeon and all those characters.
I've seen you're quite active on Instagram, but I believe you're not on Twitter, right? Which I imagine Twitter is where one gets the very shit end of the film discourse.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I hate social media. The very, very. Anyway, you know, I'm not a fan of social media, full stop. Instagram, and if you look at it, it's really just pictures of makeup effects. I don't really post pictures of any of my family or my life. And honestly, I do that really because it serves people who purchase or buy art from me. So I do it really for that thing. I would say that on every given week, I am, I would say 2 or 3 times a week, I consider shutting down Instagram. Yeah, and saying I'm done with this. But I only, here's the key to Instagram I've discovered. I only follow about 90 people. And I've had to stop following so many people because I don't mind people posting certain things, but then when they post political rants or stuff that I just find utterly offensive, and I don't know why they would do it, because to me, it strikes such a you know, a yes or no kind of, you're in my camp or you aren't, that I find it offensive. So I do it purely for art, you know, and that's the only reason I do it. And what's been very nice is that people have written to me about Judgment and just said, hey man, just want to say thank you very much, you know, like really appreciated it. So it's the very least, I think just being a casual Instagrammer is the very, you know, is dipping your toe into it. But yeah, I certainly couldn't. Yeah, I haven't got an OnlyFans page yet. Yeah, I should make it.
I was just going to say, but things have become very, I think, partisan in recent years. you're either with us or against us
that,
mentality's been everywhere.
I'm just so shocked that people would be that bold to say certain comments. It's like, especially when you're, the people even in effects have been it, and I've been like, you're an effects artist. Why are you saying that? If you think that, then why don't you quit effects and go and be a politician and go and make a change? Stop just blarding on about it. I mean, I do, like I speak to my father's an 81-year-old guy who sits and watches the news all day long, so it doesn't take him more than 2 minutes of conversation before he's literally telling me what's wrong with the government and everything else and who's, corrupt and who's this. And I just say to him constantly, why do you keep going back to a well that's polluted? Why would you keep going back there? And the horror industry and the horror community are very same. Never will you deal with a more polarizing community of people in the horror community. They're very virulent about what they like and what they don't like. Regarding Hellraiser sequels, regarding any movie sequels and remakes and all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I've always had the same opinion as like people ask me, what do you think about remakes and what do you think about reboots and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, look, nobody's going to come along in the night and steal your original copy of whatever it is you like. Like if you're a fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, no one's going to come in the night and take your Toby Hooper version away. You'll always have it. So if someone's going to make another one, then it's a job for somebody for a few months and they make a film and I'm sure there's passion behind it. And you're either going to like it, you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. So, just wait until it comes out and have an opinion then, In
that respect, because Hellraiser's obviously got a remake coming up. I mean, which I assume you'll be watching. I assume we'll be watching it too. I know the idea of it being made in no way bothers you, but are you are you optimistic about the remake? Because I know there's been talk of one for fucking years, isn't there?
I mean, I've got several feelings on this. I mean, obviously, definitely, there's a personal kind of like, wow, it would have been nice to have got a call. You know what I mean? Just to get a call would have been nice. Even just to maybe talk about the effects would have been nice. Like, I feel like I did the work and I put it in there and I think I was delivered. So why not give me a call? It's like, but I understand. And then I look at what they're doing and I have my opinions. I mean, and obviously there's a lot of kind of like people trying to get information and grasp and take 2 and 2 and get 6 out of it, and who's directing it and who's producing it and who's doing the effects and who's in it and blah, blah, blah. Again, the film's either going to be good or bad or really, really good or really, really bad. I mean, it'll fall somewhere in there, right? At first, I was very excited because I thought, oh, this is going to be a high-budget affair because it's David Goyer, and Goyer's a very, very high-powered and high-paid screenwriter. And then I thought, a director of some note, in the director they had. But then all of a sudden I noticed we were just shooting the whole film in Serbia with all Serbian cast and, mainly and crew. And that worried me because you don't really go to Serbia to make, when you've got a large amount of money. And then we're premiering on Hulu, which doesn't really, bode well. But again, I mean, hey, sometimes great things come in small packages, so we'll see. On a technical level, I saw a picture of the box that the actor person playing Pinhead was holding, and I thought that was terrible, I have to say. I mean, I think the Hellraiser box to me is an absolutely perfect design. I didn't design it. It was designed by a brilliant designer called Simon Says, who, rest in peace kind of thing. But beautiful design. To me, that wasn't broke, so why fix it, and why change it? To me, it feels a bit arrogant to change that beautiful, beautiful puzzle box design. But again, sometimes a new broom wants to sweep clean. But I mean, I like The Ritual. I thought that was a very cool and creepy movie. So yeah, I'm optimistic. I'm curious to see. But at the same time, I think, does it mean that in the comfort of my own home, if I watch it and it's really good, I'll be like, oh, that's really, really good, like I really wish I could have worked on that. And if it's really, really bad, do I go, tee-hee? Maybe now people will like Judgment more than my movie, that movie, but I don't know. So yeah, I'm pulled. I'm pulled here and back and forth about how I should feel about it. Some days I don't want to know nothing about it. Some days I want to know everything. Other days I couldn't give a poo, and other days I'm just like, I'm morbidly curious. I am curious to see what the Cenobites look like, and stuff like that. But again, it's I do think that director, is a pretty good storyteller. So we shall see, right? I mean, it's exciting. At least it's out there, and it's a continuation. I certainly wasn't that impressed with Candyman, the new Candyman. I think, I think we got it right with the first Candyman. So.
Something I was mentioning earlier, the Judgment sequel. Yeah,
the Judgment sequel, that was really, honestly, as we came to the end of shooting the movie, the studio were kind of like very excited by the dailies and saying, if this turns out good, we might be interested in maybe, carrying this on. And obviously I was utterly thrilled with that. And really the idea of the concept of a sequel was nothing more than probably sitting in a bar having a drink saying, well, what would it be and what would we do with it kind of thing, So the idea for me was that, Pinhead, who's been banished, back on Earth, is this homeless character, and really the movie would kind of like have two themes, really. You're following him kind of like, maybe he doesn't remember who he is at first. It's almost Jason Bourne-esque that he doesn't know who he is, and then kind of like he's getting to grips and kind of remembering what he was, and basically he wants to find his way back. And then a new Pinhead or a new, head of the Gash has been brought in, and the Auditor is, trying to work with this character, but it's not working out. So the Auditor is leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for, the Pinhead, the original Pinhead character, the Paul Taylor Pinhead, we'll call him for this reason, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs to lead him so that he can come back and regain his crown, and then hopefully have a face-off between two Pinheads, you know what I mean, or two head Cenobites, you know what I mean? So that was really the idea. It seemed like the logical way to go. But obviously it'll never happen now. But the only other thing is that I own the character of the Auditor. The Auditor was created 3 years before Hellraiser Judgment. So there is always potential that I could do something with that, whether it would be a book or, maybe a short, or, maybe down the line somebody gets excited by it and says, there's a lot of fan interest in this character now. Nobody's ever looked at doing an Auditor movie, and I'd be interested in doing that. Whether I played it or somebody else played it, I don't know. But I think if the character is strong enough, you could do something with it. You know what I mean?
As a fellow Brit, when you hear the Order of the Gash be said, do you snigger?
Yeah, of course. Of course you do. It's the order of the bloody fanny, right? No, absolutely. I've always had a problem with the Order of the Gash. It's always made me laugh. Absolutely, you can't, right? I mean, I used to have a mate of mine who was from Lancashire, who, and I apologise to all of the female listeners in here, but his favourite comment was to walk into a nightclub. You'd walk in and he'd go, I'd say, I'll meet you in the club in a minute, or I'll meet you at the bar, and I'd go to the bathroom and I'd come out and I'd say, how is it? And he'd go, chock full of gash, man. I do have to tell you, by the way, I'm actually technically an honorary Scot, so there you go.
Oh, cool.
The reason being, I did a TV show in Scotland for years for Scottish television. Creepy, Strange Tale. Do you remember? And this isn't the show, but do you remember? You remember the show Rabsy Nesbitt? Do you remember Rabsy?
Yes, I do.
You remember the young character, the kid who was like not a kid, but was a grown-up guy who ended up becoming was unfortunately.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I did a TV show with him. It was like a kids' TV show, and I did like 2 animatronic characters. So I would go up every week, and John Stott was the co-producer of it, and I would go up, and we shot all over Scotland, and I grew up watching Gregory's Girl. So
great film.
Gregory's Girl. So I learned to speak my Scottish accent from watching Gregory's Girl, because that's how. Yeah, it was like, hey, lady, easy with the sugar, take it easy. So when I was up in the show doing the show, I would actually quite a lot of the time just roll into a Scottish accent and tended to chat all the time, and it was brilliant. It's kind of one of those things I just did automatically. And one time we were shooting up there, and we were all having lunch, and John Stott said, I want to address the crew for just a moment, if that's okay. And he said, it's about Gary Tunnicliffe. And he said, Gary, will you stand up? And I stood up, and he said, we've all noticed that you will speak with a Scottish accent from time to time. And I said, I'm terribly sorry, I apologise. He went, no, we've all listened to it, and it's actually quite a bloody good Scottish accent. So we've all decided that you, from now on, can be an honorary Scot, because your accent's actually quite nice. And I was really taken with this and felt quite good about myself. So and we were shooting in Glasgow. So that night I got into a cab to go back to the airport, and I jump in the cab, and the driver goes, where to, pal? And I said, to the airport police, pal. He's like, and yeah, brother. He said, you're Scottish television. I'm going to tell you, you're with a wee fella. You're shooting with a wee fella. You know what a wee fella is? Is that what you're doing there? And I said, I'm terribly sorry. I don't understand. He went, oh, you're not fucking Scottish, you bastard. Lying to me, a cheeky shit. You know, it all fell apart when I couldn't deal with the guttural Glaswegian, you know. So I got my lilting Edinburgh accent quite, you know, my lilting Scottish accent okay, but
I have to say it's quite a good accent. It's I've certainly in some heavy production movies I've certainly seen worse Scottish accents. Braveheart.
Mine was just like the again. I think if you watch Gregor's Girl, if you're going to do a Scottish accent, I think watch a wee bit of Gregor's Girl, watch a bit of Trainspotting, and you know, those two are, you know. Don't watch some of the other ones where people are just like, what on earth are you doing there? But let me ask you a question, David.
Hi.
Can you say purple burglar?
Purple burglar.
Yeah, it's hard for a Scot, though, right? You really have to enunciate it. And a lot of people go, purple
burglar.
Purple burglar. It's not an easy phrase to say for a Scot. I know that. But yeah, so I have a great affinity for Scotland. But yes, I, like you, always giggled like a churlish 13-year-old when someone would go, "On the order of the gash."
See, I have to say that I found it out from reading this, because it's never mentioned in any of the films, and I found out about it from like reading the sort of extra material and going onto the wiki page for Hellraiser. And I remember a night out with David when I first told him the order of the gash,
Really?
and you just burst out laughing. You had a proper laugh for a while.
For a while, it wasn't going to be called the Stygian Inquisition. I did think about calling it, you know, the League of the Minge or something, you know, like that. You know? The Mingy Explorers or something. I don't know. You know.
I've got a quick question I've always wondered about. It's a particular effect in part 6. You might not. This might not be one of yours. The bit where the guy tries to intimidate the main dude by shooting himself, right, always struck me as stupid. But there's a really interesting sound effect where you hear this like fist punch as the bullet goes through his head. I was wondering, when it comes to things like Foley work, do you know how something like that ends up happening?
Yes, Foley work, honestly, it's like one of those things. It's like you get what you pay for. You know what I mean? And sometimes they will use stock sounds because the best way to do Foley work, obviously, is to do it live in the studio, you know, and like have a great Foley artist where they come in with the tray of vegetables and the shoes and the scratchy things and all that. But so often now it's just like it's cut and play sound effects. So it's like, you know, what have we got? You know, and obviously they'll find things and they go, oh, that sounds okay. And oftentimes it's like again to use a music industry thing. It's amazing how when you're in a band and you're recording a demo and it sounds so great in the studio when the guy's mixing it, you know what I mean? You're like, you know, they're playing it to you on their speakers and on the deck, and you're like, we sound fantastic. And then they give you a cassette or now it'd be a digital thing, you know, you sit in your car and go, we sound like shit now, you know what I mean? So sometimes the way it sounds in the studio, it doesn't sound quite the same playing through regular speakers. So I don't know the effect you're talking about. I can't say. You're talking about Hellseeker, right?
Yeah, that's right. The guy shooting himself to scare him, it just always struck us as really funny.
I can't imagine any reason to ever go back and watch Hellraiser Hellseeker ever again in my entire life. One funny thing I can tell you about Hellraiser Hellseeker, you know the scene when he's on the floor and he's got the lamprey eel coming out of his mouth?
Yeah.
Which we did all practically. It was all practical. I'll never forget when we were doing that, Dean Winters farted when he was doing it. It was hilarious. Obviously he'd been clenching and holding it in, and suddenly he's writhing around on the floor and he just lets rip this fart. And I remember it was one of those things where I think certain actors will own it and just be like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And Dean just chose to go with no, that never happened. You know, it just never happened. But it was like one of those things where we were like, did he just fart? You know, like a massive fart on there, you know, and I think we've all, again, we've all clenched and held things in, and then the idea of having to spasm around and choking on a lamprey, obviously something got out. But I'll never forget in the middle of this very intense scene, a raucous fart being ripped out. But
That'd have been brilliant for a gag reel for Hellseeker.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think anyone ever did gag reels on any of the Hellraiser movies, which is funny because funny things did happen. I think there were a couple of gag shots on Deader. There's a scene where I think Doug did something Kari Wuhrer threw a light shade at Doug, and I think she threw it and it almost hit him, so she got really worried about that. But Kari Wuhrer on Deader, she was hilarious. She was constantly cracking up, and I think the way she maintained her emotional level was by either giggling like a lunatic or screaming and crying. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it worked for her in that way. I don't know. I always think it's nice. I always think it's again, if you see a very intense horror film. I mean, I think I wouldn't want to see a gag reel on The Exorcist. It would ruin it for me. You know what I mean? But I think sometimes, I think the idea of showing the audience that the crew had a good time, and sometimes I say, it's fun to see. It's like that classic photo of Boris Karloff drinking a cup of tea with Jack Pierce doing his makeup. It breaks the illusion a little bit, you know what I mean? And gives it a sense of reality.
It's perhaps a strange parallel. It's also like if you ever see a BDSM clip and they have people in it beforehand telling you about how happy they are to do it. And I guess that's almost what the gag reel for a horror film is.
I wouldn't know. I mean, but we all know a little bit more about you now, David, don't we?
Well, allegedly, I've been told.
Thank you for sharing that, David. And clearly, if I come to Aberdeen, I knew where the dungeon is that you go to.
When I was a younger man, maybe, but
yeah, it's a younger man's game. That's for sure. I think it's interesting the fact that the thing is, I was listening to your talk with Nick Vince, and about Hellraiser having such a shocking effect when it came out in '87, and I do think, unfortunately, now what's weird is that you look at the world of when Hellraiser came out and piercings and that kind of stuff, and now everybody's covered in tattoos these days. Everybody's got piercings sticking out of all over their bodies and body modifications. So it'll be interesting to see how this new Hellraiser deals with that, because what was shocking back then, it's not shocking now. That's why, in some ways, with Judgment, I didn't have big money to go for big shocks, so I kind of went for those intimate things, like what's the very worst thing that I can do to somebody that's not reliant upon effects. It's like being licked all over by a bunch of old ladies, and then having them spit into little vials and then pour that down your throat. To me, that was the most disgusting thing I could possibly think of.
Yeah.
And again, what somebody might look at the jury, for instance, in Judgment and go, "Oh, look, that's just titillation. It's just nudity for nudity's sake." But it was really meant to be a paradox that you've got these beautiful female bodies, this from the head down, and then you've got this head that's lacerated,
missing, because
so
you're right, they're missing all that flesh, and it's like their chin bones sticking out, and it was that contrast of what you'd say would be titillating and grotesque. It's
almost like you go into a place and see somebody from behind and they turn around and it's a guy, you know what I mean? Like you see long hair and a body and you go, "Ooh," turns around, it's a dude, and you're like, "Oh no." So really with the jury, it was like, as a guy seeing this voluptuous naked flesh and then going, would you still do the deed? Would you still want to do the deed with somebody like that? So what people just saw as oh, it's just nudity for nudity's sake. Wasn't. It was meant to challenge you. And secondly, the reality is when you've got no money on a film set, cheap costumes look very cheap, whereas flesh, canvas, the naked body, drenched in blood or whatever, just looks really, really interesting. It's far more interesting. And I don't like full nudity. I never have. That's why I had the girls in thongs. I thought with the old ladies, it was important to have them nude because that really... To me, it was hearkening back to my childhood of when you're like a 5-6-year-old and Granny comes over and gives you a kiss and you don't want to be kissed by Granny. You know what I mean? It's Bill and Ted when Granny Preston's kissing.
Yeah.
It's like, what can I do? How's the worst version of that? Well, now they're naked and now you're tied to a table and they're not just kissing you on the mouth; they're licking you all over. It's like I was trying to do intimate, something that was just downright creepy. And that's what I was trying to achieve. Same with the assessor, to me, watching somebody eat, and we've all done this. We've all been to dinner with somebody who just has no table manners and ate like a pig, and you just sit there thinking, I'm going to throw up. And that's where I wanted with that. I wanted this guy to just gorge himself in front of you. It was almost a little bit like, you asked about influences earlier on, David, like The Cook, the Thief, the Wife, and Her Lover. It was kind of like Greenaway. I was trying to do something as baroque and as crazy as that. I can't believe I just said baroque. That's actually Clive Barker would always get that into interviews. He'd always be like, it's so baroque, baroque. But again, I was trying to go for that tone of that kind of Lynch, The Cook, the Thief, the Wife, and Her Lover. Again, how do I add more control over the edit? I would like to have had just long moments of stillness, of just, lingering on things a lot more rather than chopping it up the way it does. I actually have all of the footage from the audits on a drive, downloaded onto a massive terabyte drive, and I have said that the next film I do, if I ever direct again, I will sit the editor to one side and I will recut a whole proper audit and put it on the internet or something.
Yes, release the Tunnicliffe cut. We're starting the hashtag.
Oh yeah, that would be hilarious. Yeah. Release the Tunnicliffe cut, and you will really throw up when you watch it.
This really is the last question, because I've got to nip away in just half an hour ago. But what comes next for you?
What comes next for me?
Yeah, because I saw you're working on Dark Harvest right now, which is a fucking amazing book. Yeah. So I'm delighted to see what you're going to be doing the effects on that.
Well, no. I mean, here's what happened. I was in Los Angeles doing the effects on a little tiny film called Play Dead for Patrick Lussier, who I said that I will always work with no matter what. And a friend of mine I had dinner with, and he said, and I said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm going to go to Canada, and I'm doing a thing called Dark Harvest, working for an effects artist called Vincent Van Dyke, who's a brilliant young effects guy in his 30s. And I said, what is it? And he said, it's this character called, Sawtooth, or, the October Boy, as it's called in the book. And I said, well, that sounds fantastic. And I said, well, if you need a makeup artist, and he said, but you're retired. And I said, the right project. And then he called me a couple of days later and said, would you like to come and meet Vincent? And I met with Vincent, and we had a wonderful conversation. And Vincent was like, would you be interested in doing this? And I said, possibly. And he said, it's going to be a lot of nights. And I went, it's all I've ever done. It's going to be, it's a horror film. And I was like, it's all I've ever done. It's taking care of one character and making sure it's cool. That's all I've ever done. And we had such a wonderful talk and chat, and I read the script and loved it, and the character they designed was fantastic. So I didn't design anything. Let me just say, I didn't design and nothing at all. So I was just applying this one character, and I had the most fantastic experience working with David Slade and MGM, and went up to Canada and did that. And working in Winnipeg, I'm very excited. I think it's supposed to come out September the 22nd of next year. But it was just, again, nothing to do with me. I didn't do it. I didn't apply it. I was just very fortunate to be the person who got to glue it on and do that. And I had a really, really good time, which was, being mistreated by certain companies over the years. It was nice to go and have a good experience, and I can't say enough great things about Vincent Van Dyke and his team. They were fantastic. So, for me, I go where the wind blows me, really. I mean, I'm supposed to direct. I'm supposed to direct a clown horror film called Chlorophobia, but that's got financing problems. I've got a couple of things I've written, which are kicking around, but no one's chewing at. But I mean, I'm kind of like, a bit of a cinematic mercenary, really. I'll go wherever they send me. So I don't really like doing makeup effects that much. I kind of feel like I've been there, seen it, done it all. And really, the capper for that was when I did Gone Girl. After I did Gone Girl and that one effect, I was like, I think I'm done. I think I've done everything I wanted to do. I did the Hellraiser character and felt like I did my work on that. I've got to work with David Fincher and not get yelled at and have him say some nice things to me. And I've worked with Tim Burton. I worked with Rennie Harlin. I worked with Wes Craven, Joe Dante. Got to work with actors like De Niro and Nick Cage and John Travolta. So I've had good experiences, bad experiences. Kind of seen it all, done it all. Got the T-shirts to prove it. Didn't feel like there was anything else to really do. So I wanted to concentrate on just kind of like art and just, making model kits and just, doing some writing and stuff like that.
Gary, thank you so much for coming on. This has been the most interesting interview I've ever been part of. And we
I
interviewed
doubt that. You see, you
No,
just
no,
say,
see,
you say that to everybody, see.
we interviewed a Bigfoot hunter on this show, right? So this is the most interesting one we've done. So thank you so much. This has been really good fun. And
Well, thank you, and thank you for putting Judgment number 4 on your list. I mean, it's thrilling for me. I mean, to be in the middle of the pack is amazing. I've even seen people put it as like number 3, which blows my mind that the $350,000 little movie gets in there. And I mean, and I understand that, you know, people tend to preface it with it's, you know, it's not the best, it's not the worst, or it's the best of the sequels, which isn't saying much, they always say. But it's like, you know, I'm glad that people, and I think what's really strange is it seems to have caught more of a following over the years. You know, more people have gone back to it and gone, oh yeah, it's not that bad actually. Like, it's actually got some fun little moments in it. So I appreciate that, and moreover, I appreciate that people liked what Paul did, because I think Paul did do a good job. But I think it stands up there in the canon, and there were worse films and there are definitely better ones. I mean, that's always the funniest thing when people review it and they say, well, it's not as good as the first one. It's like, well, hey, I never suggested it was going to be, you know what I mean? Like, you know, the first film is an utter, and always will be, a classic. You know, it's the film that got me inspired to you know, I wanted to do, I mean, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I saw a movie with a character and said, I love this. I want to do that character. I want to work with Clive Barker. I remember vividly the first day I ever met Clive, you know, where I was, what he said, everything else. And it was an utter joy for me to meet that guy and to have some fantastic kind of hangouts with him when he was talking about opera and music, and watch him scribble drawings and just, you know, Lord of Illusions and stuff like that. You know, I miss the fact that I, you know, lost connection with him over the years. You know, he was one of those guys that whenever you hung out with him, that if he turned his attention to you, you felt like he really was listening to you and interested in everything you had to say, and, you know, listened to it and took it on board. Amazing individual. Always felt inspired when I was around him, just by his work ethic, that he was just working all the time. He would literally leave his house and think, oh, I need to go back home and start writing or sculpting or painting or doing something, because, Jesus, that guy never stops, you know. And I still think it's a shame that more of his work isn't seen, you know, cinematically, and he's being brought to life, because I'd love to see all of the Books of Blood, you know, put there, you know, on screen. But I consider myself very fortunate that I got to not only, you know, watch a horror film, a Hellraiser movie, and say, I want to do that, but then I got to work on it, do Pinhead, and eventually got to play a Cenobite, you know, and a Cenobite that seems to have become kind of like liked by some people. So it's utterly thrilling for me. I can't grumble. So I'm a very lucky person, and I have to remind myself of that all the time.
That's such a positive note to go out on as well. I feel very joyful now. Professionalism. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
All right.
Check out horrorcallfilms.co.uk. White Bat Audio.